The spreading flames jumped on the charred building. There were many earthquakes in Ingzhou, and the bungalows were mostly made of wood, so they burned very quickly. Not long after, only a few embers were left in the vast expanse of whiteness. At that time, Weno was in the car. He only saw Boss Huaiji get out of the car and come back after a while. Then, his expression was calm until now. Sometimes, he would even be absent-minded for a long time. Huaisher looked back in confusion, as if he had not heard what he had just said. Is it about what happened during the day? Weno asked, during the day, boss, after you went there, you've been like this since you came back. Are you really an idiot? Huaisher shook his head and sighed. Weno shrugged. Because boss always writes everything on his face. Huaisher smiled bitterly. After a long silence, he said, during the day, I went there. To be honest, I just wanted to help a little. In the end, he was not able to help. When the fire spread, Huaisher realized that he was alone and could not help at all. He could only watch the fire spread and burn more than a dozen old houses. An old woman with a head full of white hair held a young child and cried silently on the street. The muddy tears fell into the ashes and stained the cracked cement with a wisp of grayish black. The people who had hurriedly escaped stood on the street and looked blankly at the scene of their houses being burned down. However, they were not afraid. Their expressions were dull and calm, as if nothing had been lost. Huaisher lowered his head and looked at the old woman, who was crying so hard that she could not make a sound. I wanted to protect them. Weno! Huaisher sighed, silently. I told her, don't be afraid. There will be people from the Huaiji group coming to help. At the very least, they will be able to find you a temporary place to stay. With us around, we will protect you. Those people will not come back, and this will not happen again. But no one paid me any attention. Only the old woman looked up with her empty eyes, full of indifference and resentment. She lost her husband because of the armed fight, her son because of the forbidden drugs, and her last home because of the sudden fire. She had been tortured by the suffering of the inner circle of Dambwa for her whole life. She had long become numb and used to it. In the end, it had become an irreplaceable contempt. The old woman looked at Huaisher's face indifferently. Every time Huaisher closed his eyes, he could recall that pair of muddy eyes and her hoarse words. She asked me, what's the difference between you and them? In the long silence, Huaisher closed his eyes tiredly. I actually don't know how to answer her. They were both extreme Tao, and they were all scum. Was there a difference? They could not live under the sun, and they could not live in places where the sun could not shine. From the beginning to the end, the weak and powerless could only endure the pain. Everyone demanded it. To them, what was the difference between the alliance that dominated them, the plain Huaiji group in front of them, their so-called compatriots, and the gangs outside the inner circle of Dambwa? In the silence, Weno looked at Huaisher in shock. He could not help but scratch his head. You can't say that, right? He thought for a long time and said, seriously, actually there's a difference. I think there's a big difference. It's just that we have *CK. He could not understand those messy things at all. When he was anxious, he spoke incoherently. In the end, he angrily hammered his own head and gave up thinking. He just said firmly, at least, boss is different from the others. Huaisher was amused. It's just less protection money. Anyone can do that, right? It's not the same. Weno hesitated for a long time before speaking again. Boss, I don't really understand what you said to me before. It's about extreme Tao and rats falling into the sea. To be honest, I don't understand it at all. He thought for a while and said seriously, but even if it's a ship made of rats, other than fighting with other ships, it can still allow more people to live, right? If it was Huaiji group, he could definitely do it. Ueno believed in this almost blindly. He believed in everything. He did even more than Huaishur. Growing up in the inner circle of Danbo, even the most simple-minded mixed breed could understand his own insignificance, the ugly way of life, and the original sin that he was born with. Betrayal, killing, fighting, plundering, and deception. He had long been used to it, until one day a person descended from the sky and proved to him that everything could be different. Even mixed breeds could hold their heads high and live in this world with dignity. It was like an unattainable dream, a flame lit up in the darkness. It's not just me. Everyone in Huaiji group believes in this, Ueno said with certainty. Shanya said with certainty, if someone says that he doesn't believe what boss says, then he must be lying. After a long silence, Huaishur raised his head and looked at his subordinate beside him. He sighed in surprise. Ueno, you're surprisingly good at talking. Really? Ueno widened his eyes in disbelief. Yes. Huaishur held back his laughter and nodded seriously. Maybe he really has the talent to be a teacher. I think at least he'll have no problem being a physical education teacher. Really? Huaishur didn't answer. He only raised his hand and patted him on the shoulder. Thank you, Ueno. He said, thank you for believing in me so much. Ueno grinned. He was excited and happy like a proud shark. In the distance, waving lights came from the darkness. The scouts in front had sent out a predetermined signal. Then, high-pitched horns burst forth, one after another, spreading in the darkness. It was like the whistle of a giant steel ship. Car lights lit up one after another, converging into a sea of lights, illuminating everything. Let's go, Ueno. Huaishur stared at the birds flying across the sky. He said, we're going to set sail. 15 minutes ago, in the dead-silent parking lot, a loud and powerful declaration was heard. The priest of the Yamaguchi shrine said that I'm a general who built his success on the bones of 1,000 soldiers. I don't believe it. I think that when you're out in the world, you have to decide whether you live or die. The president of the Iron King faction, Yamamasa Kosho, was holding a gorgeous long sword. He strolled in the formation in front of him and made a bold speech. Although these words sounded ominous, the extreme Taoists who lived on the edge of their blades didn't care about this at all. Their eyes were already red from the encouragement and rewards from their superiors. They rubbed their palms and couldn't wait. Right in front of him were the elites specially selected from the Iron King faction for this surprise attack. There were a total of 141 people, more than 10 of them were ascendants, and the rest were ruthless extreme Taoists who could fight against 10 people at once. Not to mention, there were also precious relics from the looming mansion. As he clapped his hands, the subordinates behind him respectfully stepped forward and presented the heavy flagpole with both hands. On top of the simple flagpole was an ancient military flag. It was unknown how many years had passed, but it had already turned yellow and was covered in dried blood. The moment the flag was unfolded, the evil spirits hidden on the flag almost jumped out of the darkness, and a ferocious aura spread out. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a blood-red light and sprinkled on everyone's head. Under the shroud of the source substance projection, everyone's face became ferocious and violent, as if an army of evil spirits from the underworld had arrived. This is the Zhong Kuei horse seal, passed down by Lord Hondo, the god of war under Lord Tokugawa. Yamamasa Kosho laughed excitedly. With the help of this military flag, those bastards are nothing but chickens and pottery dogs, unable to withstand a single blow. Tsushima-kun, I bestow it to you. I hope your martial arts will prosper. I also hope that you can help me pacify the world like how Lord Hondo assisted Lord Tokugawa. I will certainly not disappoint the president. Yamamasa Kosho was overjoyed. He held the Zhong Kuei horse seal with both hands and carefully put away this powerful force. Very good. With a fierce general like Tsushima-kun and an expert like Mr. Hasegawa secretly helping us, we will definitely succeed this time. I wish you all a pleasant journey. Yamamasa Kosho grinned and grinned. I will wait here for you and the head of the old thief Tenmu to return together. As the wine was drunk, the roar of the engine burst out from the parking lot. In the roar, the traffic rushed like a long dragon, rushing into the inner circle of Danbwa. In the traffic, in a particularly luxurious car, Yamamasa Kosho, who had just been entrusted with a heavy responsibility, respectfully saluted the young man beside him. This time, I will rely on Mr. Hasegawa to take care of this operation. What are you talking about? It's my duty. Hasegawa Kosho smiled reservedly. Now that we have a thunderous attack, the defense in Kashihara Hospital is empty. The only one who can be my opponent is Tenda. Everyone just needs to defend, and leave the rest to me. Yamamasa Kosho was overjoyed. With Mr. Hasegawa Kosho, this battle will definitely succeed. All the way, there was no obstruction. In the quiet night of Kyoto, vehicles came and went, but under the cover of Hasegawa Kosho's source substance, the convoy was shrouded in shadows. It couldn't be seen clearly from 100 steps away. Only a vague gray mist could be seen roaming between the cities, like a giant python out of its nest. In the middle of the convoy, Hasegawa Kosho closed his eyes and took a nap, but his mind and consciousness spread in all directions with the gray mist overlooking everything around him, leaving no clues. Only the black birds passing by in the sky would occasionally visit, curiously staring at what was happening on the ground. The hybrid alliance really didn't have any vigilance. I'm afraid they were already scared out of their wits, right? Once the headquarters, Tenmu, fell into a coma, they would be leaderless. Now, they were probably fighting for power internally. In the distance, the security of the inner circle of Danbwa was also sparse, and there was no defense at all. It's just that I don't know why Hasegawa Kosho's brows frowned. Are there more crow today? Tsujima raised his head blankly and looked out of the window, only to see the shadows hovering above the sky, scarlet eyes overlooking the earth, making noises from time to time. But the further they went, the closer they got to the inner circle of Danbwa, the more crow there were. In the end, crimson brilliance appeared in every eave, every street lamp, and every shade of the trees. The wings with iron brilliance were unfolded and mockingly shrieked. The mighty crow tide suddenly swept, covering the entire sky. Wait, this is... Tsujima Daimu's eyes widened, and then he heard a loud roar. The whole earth suddenly shook, and the galloping convoy in front suddenly stopped. In the darkness, two mournful car lights suddenly lit up. It was as if a sleeping monster had been awakened, and the engine made a loud noise. In the roar, it rushed out, whistling forward, swaying its huge body, breaking the oncoming wind, and went straight to the galloping convoy. That was a huge oil tanker. In the darkness, the smoking man pressed the button in his hand. Subconsciously clenched his fist. Oh no! And then he saw the terrible flame rising into the sky. The terrible pressure set off white waves, sweeping and violently spreading in the quiet night of the suburbs. The blazing flame danced with the fire rain falling from the sky, sprinkling the fire of purgatory. In this sudden explosion, the gasoline and insignificant metal fuel contained in it were all converted into burning heat and spread in all directions. In an instant, 1/3 of the convoy was engulfed, and the sticky flowing flame was still spreading rapidly, engulfing all the scrapped vehicles that had no time to escape. So, in the fire, shrill screams and cries sounded. In the excited overlook of the crow, a figure slowly emerged in the burning fire. Out of the darkness, through the burning flame and the terrible heat, it was as if a real devil had walked out of his own hell, crushing the red-hot steel and charred bones as he walked forward step by step. From the fire of purgatory, a happy face showed. Oh, Everyone, good evening. Huaishir stretched out his hand, slowly pulled out the famous sword given by Tenmu, and greeted with a smile. Did you miss me? Chapter 765. No one responded. No one wanted to see him here, and some people didn't even know who this person was. But looking at the undisguised horns on his head, they knew that he was a member of the Hybrid Alliance. At the moment when Tsushima Daigu understood, he felt an indescribable anger, and then he felt cold all over and almost trembled. The other party came here, which proved that their actions today had already been known by them. The odds were stacked against them. What was more serious was that there was a mole in the Iron King gang. Tsushima Daigu never dreamed that the mole was not in this group of people today, nor in the Iron King gang, but in the looming hall behind the Iron King gang. But even if he trembled with anger, it was useless. In the flames of the explosion, the evil spirit who pulled out the sword stepped forward step by step and introduced himself with a smile. Belonging to the Alliance, the white paper man, I'm here to send you on your way. In his hand, the famous saber forged by a famous blacksmith revealed layers of scale-like patterns that shone on everyone's faces. It was cold to the heart. Rotten rope Muramesa. Among the many collections of Simu, this was still a rare sword. Even if it had not been integrated with the power of hell and became a border relic, it still had rare sharpness and hardness. In Ingzhou, the so-called rotten rope meant snake. The knife craftsman who forged it made a mistake at the time of worship and did not welcome the white snake spirit, so it became an empty shell. But for Huaishir, this empty shell was more convenient than any border relic. Now, as his wrist turned, a ray of blood spread from the sword, just like countless scarlet pupils in the crow tide, and indescribable fierceness and resentment emerged from it. A fierce sword full of curses and hunger. As Huaishir waved his wrist, he easily tore the burning basket in front of him. In this way, he went deep into the encirclement. A low voice rose in the flames, and the undisguised third stage aura spread. Good times are always short. He asked curiously, do you want to come one by one or go together? What arrow is it? Will anyone come to fight in front of the battle? In his fury, Tsushima Daigu sneered. Such an idiot who dared to fight in front of the battle should have been burned to death. He slowly raised the heavy banner in his hand. The demon banner suddenly unfurled amidst the flames. The secret technique from the Yellow Springs was activated, instantly bringing about a qualitative change in the origin substance. It was rumored that war god Hondo's Zhong Kue horse seal had descended upon the Yellow Springs. Along with the addition of the horse seal, a frenzied fluctuation spread out. Needless to say, those elite extreme Daos launched their attack without a word, instantly surrounding him. The ascendants at the front didn't waste any time and attacked ruthlessly. A whistling sound broke through the air. The people behind them took out all kinds of light firearms from their cars and aimed at Huaishir, waiting for him to reveal a flaw. Why are you still playing one-on-one? Times have changed. But then, the person at the front suddenly stopped. His ferocious head silently slid down from his shoulder, and blood splattered everywhere. There was no back and forth, nor was there any clumsiness. The figure holding the sharp blade moved forward, as if he was cutting the weeds in front of him. He easily cut all the figures who dared to block in front of him into two halves. Clean and neat beheading. Then, in the loud sound of gunfire, he casually waved the blade. His reflexes, which were beyond the imagination of ordinary people, had already keenly sensed the direction of the bullet before his finger pulled the trigger, bathed in the rain of metal. Huaishir raised his head and looked at the banner in Tsushima Daigu's hand. The corner of his eyes slightly raised. Do you have a flag? He sighed in surprise and nodded, saying, What a coincidence, this thing. I have it too. In that instant, the shadow under his feet suddenly spread. In the mournful light of the fire, a wisp of pitch black quietly appeared in the dancing crimson. It was like an open door, revealing the fleeting and ferocious silhouette within. There was also a burning solemn banner. The power of the bone-bearing sanctuary was operating here. The invisible force rolled up the crows all over the sky, making the dark tide surge. Then, dazzling lights lit up from the darkness in all directions. In the places where the fire couldn't reach, the doors opened one after another. The members of the Why Paper group, who had been waiting for a long time, rubbed their hands and showed the same excited smile as Why Sure. The scarlet light flowed in their eyes, as if they were integrated with the crows. Under the miracle of young Master Ming, they had become the incarnation of the abyss in the human world. Their skin had an iron glow, and the long or short katana in their hands glowed with resentment. Tonight, Why Sure transferred more than half of the core of the Why Paper group. A total of 50 people here. The Heavens Inquisition Road had bestowed this immense power to each and every one of them. The hybrids themselves were closer to the abyss than ordinary people. They didn't feel any discomfort at all. Instead, they felt more comfortable. There were even 4 people who were particularly compatible with the crows. Their entire eyes had turned into the color of silver. Tashima Daw looked around and felt cold all over. Not only was he surprised by the strength of this hybrid alliance, but he was also afraid of the fanatical expression on those gradually approaching faces. Holy! Just like the fanatical believers cultivated by the Illuminati cult, those people's eyes burned with crazy flames. They didn't need to be ordered at all. With a loud roar, they rushed forward recklessly. The power of the steel crows collided with the blessing of journey to the underworld in an instant. The flames on the flag in the bone-burying sanctuary burned more and more vigorously. But the Zhong Kuei horse seal in Tashima Daw's hand felt a majestic force descending, and it shook wildly. If at this time, with the fierce attack of the Why Paper group and a gust of wind, maybe it would really be like the ancient military confrontation. Even the flagpole would be blown away in the collision of the source substance. Tashima turned back without thinking and looked behind him. Hegitsukawa-san. But Nagitsukawa-san's figure had already rushed forward under the wind. From his hand, the projection of a long spear slowly emerged. After the fragments of the dragonfly cut were recast, it was still an out-and-out divine weapon. On the body of the spear wrapped in crystal red, it was a key gun that looked like a cross. The wonderful spear inherited from the new heavenly flow instantly broke through the air toward Why Sure. The distance of 1,000 miles was crossed in an instant, but Why Sure moved forward as if he didn't see it. In the flames behind him, a cold light suddenly emerged across the void and slashed obliquely. From the combination of the sword heart and source substance, the unreasonable sword chi condensed and formed. It came across the air, attacking the enemy. Nagitsukawa-san's figure suddenly stopped for a moment, and he suddenly took a step back. Amidst the raging flames, a slanted crack had already appeared. Under the sharpness of the blade, even the invisible flame was cut in two. As the upper flame dissipated, the raging flames below could not break through the invisible barrier. This was the invisible sword that he had comprehended after listening to the Sword Saint's teachings for 10 years. Even if the Sword Saint snorted in disdain and saw it as a petty trick, it was still enough to frighten even ghosts and gods. The crisp sound of wooden clogs on the ground spread. The Alliance Guardian, Amada Masahito, walked out of the fire. Expressionless, only the simple long sword in his hand was lingering with a substantial killing intent. He disdained to have any conversation with the enemy. One step cut. Taijima Daw's expression was distorted. He didn't expect that at this time, Seem Tenma would be willing to send the Alliance Guardian to protect his life. Then, the mournful blood spread in front of his eyes. Hey, where are you looking? A smiling face appeared in front of him. Taijima Dao's expression didn't have time to change. His body subconsciously pulled out the 10 hands in his sleeves to block the blow that was going to stab his throat. Then his hair stood up, and he felt that his neck was cold. He was almost beheaded. Seeing the tragic cut on the 10 hands that he had used for many years, Taijima Dao didn't even have time to feel distressed. He subconsciously activated the power
After a long
of the
time,
Zhong, the banner that had followed the Ingzhou army god for many years, not only symbolized the great achievements of the Tokugawa clan in unifying the world, but also ushered in a sublimation. If it wasn't the Zhong Kuei on the banner that couldn't be completely integrated with the Ingzhou genealogy, it would have been promoted to a stigmata relic. The projection of the ferocious ox head and the horse face appeared behind Taijima Dao, and Taijima Dao's body turned into a horrifying dark color. The third-order stigmata of the Ingzhou genealogy, 2FO, in front of him, the expression of the white paper man in his arms was stagnant, as if he was surprised. But it didn't seem like he was shocked by the enemy's power, but he was surprised that he didn't kill the enemy with one strike. Very good, let's do it again. Huaisheng grinned and stepped forward again, holding the blade in his hand high. Tangzhu's power. At that moment, a loud thunder burst out again. Taijima Dao raised his hands without hesitation and blocked the 10 hands in front of his eyes again. But then his body involuntarily took a step back, and he was almost hit by the huge power of this blow. His arms were numb, and he didn't even have time to recover, because Huaisheng was in front of him again. The blade in his hand was raised high. Cut! The third strike. In the roar, Taijima Dao's arms cracked, and blood flowed out. He roared angrily and forcibly supported his defense. The Zhong Kuei horse seal in his other hand was raised high. The phantom of the god of ghouls opened his eyes and gave a blessing that was as hot as iron. But then the shadow under Huaisheng's feet shook, and the bone burial sanctuary opened a gap. From it, the dark substance flowed out, entangled Taijima's body, and spread inch by inch to the horse seal in his hand. Taijima felt as if he had been thrown into the ice sea, and was swallowed by the cold. In that instant, he saw the phantom behind Huaisheng. It was like a god patrolling the land of the dead, had turned around and cast a disdainful glance at the mortal world. The slender eyes were burning with the brilliance of divinity. The Zhong Kuei army flag shook violently, and a crack appeared. Then it was swallowed by the endless darkness in an instant and disappeared without a trace. Only the sound of chewing could be heard from the shadow, and the scarlet blade had already chopped down on his head. At the last moment, Taijima Dao's mind was blank. For some reason, he suddenly remembered the ferocious face of Yamamasa Mitsuaki and his words before he left. Was this the success of a general, the death of thousands? Darkness came and swallowed everything. Only the color of blood flowed freely in the air. A corpse had already fallen to the ground. Just behind Huaisheng, the blood-soaked Weno rushed forward, picked up the head on the ground, and roared in all directions. Iron King faction's Taijima Dao has been taken. After losing the blessing of Zhong Kuei's horse seal, the following battle was simply a one-sided massacre. After dealing with the troublesome ascendants, Huaisheng lowered his head and looked at the tip of his blade. A wisp of gray rose up and wrapped around his fingertip like dust. That was the death required for Great Si Ming's divinity transformation ritual. Just this, the corners of Huaisheng's eyes twitched. She had killed so many people, but she couldn't even reach 1% of the goal. How long would she have to kill them all? However, if the quantity was insufficient, he could make up for it with quality. He turned his head and looked at Nagayakawa, who was fighting with Tenda Masashi. Nagayakawa seemed to have noticed something and suddenly looked back. Then, He saw that the distant figure had already become close to him. He even raised his head and gave him a simple and honest smile. "Since you're already here, Chapter 766. It's the new year, and the child is still young. According to the process, the next sentence should be a death sentence. Huaisher stepped out and instantly entered the state of blood boiling. Under the state of blood boiling, Yu's step got a terrifying bonus, setting off a hurricane. Salted fish backstab. It was obviously a temporary idea, but it looked like it had been planned for a long time. It was so experienced that it made people angry. Seizing the moment when Tenda counterattacked, he attacked from the front and back. When Hasegawa looked back and saw the blade coming, his eyes almost popped out. Tenda had already blocked Hasegawa's blade, stepped forward, and swept across the waist. Waist cut. Hasegawa seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. At the critical moment, the key gun in his hand suddenly shrank. The cross-like key gun blocked Tenda's attack, and the sharp cone at the end of the long spear suddenly rose and pointed at Huaisher's throat. It was as if Huaisher deliberately pounced on him. With a slight stagnation, Huaisher's eyes blurred. He only saw a shadow suddenly emerge from behind Hasegawa, turning into a ferocious figure with an indigo face. His arms suddenly stretched out, his hands closed, and seized this opportunity to clamp Huaisher's blade. Under the sudden stab of the blade of resentment, a hole was cut in the palm of nothingness, and the source substance in it quickly flowed out and was swallowed by the crows. Facing Tenda, Hasegawa's face also turned indigo. It was completely different from the shadow that came out from behind him. It looked like a person with 2 heads and 4 arms. If it wasn't for the wrong place and different species, Huaisher almost thought that he was attacking a Neza, 3 jars of ocean god. But in the Dongsha pedigree, the 3-headed and 6-armed Neza was the manifestation of the Holy Spirit Nazanjubala from India on the land of Dongsha. Between the 3 jars of heaven, earth, and water, the divine mark that could not be reproduced with the divine mark. So far, except for a few relics, it could not be reproduced at all. How could it be casually called a god by the people of Ingzhou? The opportunity was precious. Hasegawa pulled back and instantly withdrew dozens of meters. His face was pale. It was as if he had suffered a heavy blow for no reason. Double medicine fork stigmata. Amada was the first to see through the clues. He sneered. You new heavenly flow are really unpresentable. You have the inheritance of the secret ruins guardian deity, but now you fall into the extent of taking the unorthodox path. Hasegawa's expression was indifferent, and his eyes were scarlet. With his indigo face and the equally ferocious phantom behind him, he looked more and more inhuman. Huaishi's sword strike just now had indeed dealt a heavy blow to him, or rather, it was because of the way he responded that his 5 years of hard work had gone to waste. The path of ascension passed down by the new heavenly flow was too harsh. The divinity related to the advancement of the medicine fork was firmly controlled by the big temples all over Ingzhou. Even their own people felt that it was not enough, so how could they give it to outsiders? Did he really think that Dongmi was easy to talk to? Since 12 years ago, Hasegawa had reached the third order, but after so many years, the medicine fork stigmata could not find the corresponding divinity and could not correspond to the fourth order. In desperation, he could only use the secret method of the new heavenly flow to implant the stigmata relic, Jundali Vajra scepter, into himself. Through the double existence of the medicine fork stigmata in the stigmata relic and the stigmata in his body, they intensified each other. Through the long-term communication and fusion of the source substance, he merged himself with the stigmata and the stigmata in it. With a double miracle, he crossed the edge of the fourth order and became the real secret ruins guardian deity. Once the combination was wrong, he would immediately lose his divinity, and only the path of the demon Sunua would be left, even the Jundali Vajra scepter. A treasure passed down by the new heavenly flow from generation to generation would be scrapped. At that time, Hasegawa would be the shame of the new heavenly flow. He would not be able to pull off the pillar of shame in history. In the past 5 years, Hasegawa had relied on the 7 treasures of the Iron King faction to support him at all costs, and he had made rapid progress. Now that he had finally sprouted divinity and had just taken the right path, he was stabbed in the back by Huaishi. Die, you scoundrel! With a roar and a roar, the stigmata of the double medicine fork resonated and vibrated. The guardian medicine fork turned from illusory to solid. He reached out and pulled out a Vajra scepter covered with incantations and reliefs from Hasegawa's spine. The Vajra scepter, which was still stained with blood, shone brightly. He actually ignored Amada and rushed straight at Huaishi. Aren't you giving it to me for free? Huaishi smiled disdainfully and subconsciously touched his waist. Then he touched it again and realized that he was wearing a vest and did not bring Beelzebub. His face instantly turned green. He frantically retreated with used steps, and the hatred strike brushed past the tip of Huaishi's nose. The biting cold wind lifted Huaishi into the air. Immediately after, the spear of wondrous insight was like a snake, drawing a strange arc in the air and appearing in the path that Huaishi had to take to dodge. Why are you throwing a tantrum with a young man? A mocking smile appeared on Amada Masato's face. The long sword in his hand was sheathed, and he assumed the posture of drawing his sword. The killing intent that had been nurtured by more than 10 years of sword meditation had already spilled out with the drawing of the sword in his mind. Air slash! The sharp sword marks crisscrossed in the air and shrouded Hasegawa's whole body, forcing him to stop. Just as he was about to attack again, he saw Huaishi suddenly take 3 steps back, and his body strangely fell down. Did he trip? Before Amada could react, Hasegawa was angry and did not care anymore. He swept his Vajra scepter and blocked most of the air slash, allowing the remaining sword marks to cut his body. Injury in exchange for death. He chanted the honorific name of Bodhisattva Kitachen Miaojian, and the spear technique that had been passed down from the godly skill bloomed with a blazing brilliance. He aimed at Huaishi's face and stabbed. The cold light that bloomed like the North Star illuminated the smile on Huaishi's face. The falling momentum suddenly stopped. Huaishi's hand, which was hidden behind her back, had already pulled out the katana that was stuck in the basket of the carriage. A painful black color appeared on the blade. In an instant, a mournful cry rose from the blade. Cord! The Xiang dragon roared. In the stagnant time, even Amada's mind was shocked by this moment. He widened his eyes in disbelief, but he could not see the movements of Huaishi's hands. He could only see the dark color and scarlet extending from Huaishi's hands and crisscrossing. The precious spear that was recast with dragonfly slash shook violently and broke at the waist. Then blood burst out from Hasegawa's arms and even his chest. The sound of steel breaking sounded. It was the katana that Huaishi had thrown out, but it shattered in the air. At the same time, Huaishi had pulled out a dagger from his arms. Beheading! The dagger and the Vajra collided, bursting out dazzling sparks. Before it could penetrate Hasegawa's throat, it disintegrated, and Hasegawa's scream of horror seemed to flow out from his throat in advance along with the blood. After a strange, ape-like scream, he frantically retreated, as if he saw a ghost. Frightened by the sword, he abandoned the remaining members of the Iron King faction and wanted to escape. But unfortunately, it was too late. When he turned his head, he saw Amada Masato behind him had bent down, his palm pressed on the hilt. Aedo slash. The sword in the scabbard leaped out like a dragon and cut off his left leg. Then the edge of the sword rose up and cut off his right arm. Just as Amada Masato was about to cut his heart, he heard Huaishi's hurried shout, "Tamada Senpai, have mercy!" Amada was stunned, and then immediately understood. That was close. He almost killed too much and forgot to leave one alive. With a jump, people do he chopped off Hasegawa's dog. A guy like him who lives alone is getting old. Phew, that feels and good. Can't keep up. Before he could finish sighing in his heart, raised his hand and wiped the sweat on his forehead. Rotten rope village, satisfied, full of cracks. Amada was stunned in place, dumbfounded. Unbelievable. Little brother, what's the matter with you? So, you're trying to snatch the kill? You dogs hit? Didn't you tell me to have mercy? Amada's eyes widened. Huaishi's expression stiffened, and then he immediately squeezed out a flattering smile. I was afraid that you would be tired. As he said that, he bent down, picked up the Vajra on the ground, wiped it, and then sneakily looked around and stuffed the Vajra into Amada's sleeve. He didn't put it in properly once, and it fell to the ground. He picked it up again and stuffed it in again. Then he picked up the broken key gun. But this thing was too long, and it wasn't easy to put it in his sleeve, so he could only put it in his arms. Kindly accept it, kindly accept it. Don't lower yourself to my level. Amada's expression twitched. As a lofty guardian in the Alliance, this was the first time in history that he was bribed. He should have angrily reprimanded Huaishi, but looking at that warm and considerate smile, his expression twitched, and the words that were about to come out of his mouth became much softer and filled with helplessness. Just this once. It couldn't be helped. It wasn't a bad thing for young people to have more thoughts about making a name for themselves. He didn't hold a position in the Alliance, so it was fine to let him give in. But before he left, he recalled that amazing sword strike just now, and turned around to ask, Haiki-kun, that move just now doesn't seem to be Tingo Mountain swordsmanship, right? Oh, yes, I figured it out myself. Huaishi grinned and smiled honestly. I'm learning sumo. Have you heard of the 4 styles? I'll show you, and I'll even give you a tattoo story. Like hell, I'll believe you. Amata rolled his eyes and didn't want to talk to him anymore. 2 minutes later, the last person who was struggling in vain was pulled by the neck and thrown into the fire by Weno, and the screams quickly disappeared. Just like that, the bonfire party came to an end in a joyous atmosphere. Unfortunately, the atmosphere wasn't right, and they couldn't drink beer, sing songs, and dance around the fire hand in hand. The Iron King Gang's assault team was completely wiped out. The price paid by the Huaishir group was only 16 people with minor injuries and 4 people with serious injuries. Most of them were affected by the battle between Amata and Hasegawa and were immediately sent to Kashihara Hospital. As for the rest, it was fine to just put on a Band-Aid. As the fire gradually extinguished, Huaishir looked down at his hand. Between his open 5 fingers, a grayish-black color danced silently like thick ink. This was the death that appeared in the mandate of heaven. After offering the fallen medicine fork, Great Si Ming's divinity transformation took another step forward. But how many more deaths would it take to usher in a qualitative change? Chapter 767. For Otomi Mitsuwaki, this was yet another familiar night. At first, He was filled with anticipation. Then, he gradually felt awkward. In the end, it turned into hesitation and worry. Amidst his disappointment and sadness, he welcomed the morning sun for the second time. Damn it, you guys are also donkeys. In the empty garage, Otomi Mitswaki smoked alone. He raised his head and looked at the rising sun. He raised his arm and wiped the corner of his eyes. His eyes were almost wet. In the silence, the subordinate who had returned wanted to say something but stopped. After hesitating for a long time, he walked up trembling. President, after a long time, Otomi Mitswaki turned around. Speak. The subordinate handed over his phone with trembling hands. The cable television channel on the phone was reporting the morning news. Last night, another traffic accident occurred in the suburbs. The Metropolitan Police Department reminded all citizens to pay attention to traffic safety and not to drive while drunk. A drop of alcohol from the driver, 2 streams of tears from the family. What do you mean by showing me this? Otomi Mitswaki asked faintly. I don't drink when I drive. Don't I have a driver? Being stared at by those eyes, the subordinate's small hands trembled again. Trembling, he picked up a box. This was just sent over by the Hybrid Alliance. Otomi Mitswaki waved his hand casually. Open it and see what's inside. A bomb? After opening the box, there was only a pile of fine powder inside. It was pale white mixed with big and small particles, and there were also charred embers. It looked like the ashes left behind after something had been burned. They said that the item was returned to its original owner. Otomi Mitswaki did not fly into a rage as expected. He put out his cigarette and asked calmly, So they are all dead? Yes. The subordinate nodded. Then he heard the roar of gunshots and fell into a pool of blood. Then why are trash like you still alive? Otomi Mitswaki lowered his head and stared at the lifeless eyes in the pool of blood. Did I keep you for so long just to let you show me the news? What the F***CK have you been doing? He raised his hand and pulled the trigger again and again. He turned around and shouted at the lifeless faces. Are you all mute? Trash to such an extent. You are all dead and sent back by the heavens. You still F***king pretend that nothing happened. What had he been doing all this time? Were they trying to shift the blame to someone else? More than 140 people, even if there were more than 100 pigs, Shang Tianmu wouldn't be able to kill them all in one night. The team members knelt on the ground and buried their heads deep into the cold ground, even if the blood that flowed oversoaked their foreheads. I've finally figured it out. The real problem of the Iron King Party is not the B***stards, the Italians, and the Russian Federation, but right under my butt. De Zheng roared angrily. Where is the person who promised me that he would be able to get the heaven-eyed dog's head this time? Taking the horse seal that I sold my old face to get from the higher-ups and giving it away for free. If this kind of trash didn't die, could it be that he was going to be left behind as a decoration? But what about you guys? Aren't you all the same as those pieces of trash who died? Someone even told me that the only way to take down Dambwa Inner Circle in 2 days is to die so miserably that old bastard Shang Tianmu would laugh himself to death in the hospital. In the midst of the furious roar, a tinkling sound suddenly rang out. The phone rang. The passionate chorus of the female idol group echoed in the air, making the originally cold atmosphere become gentle. It was getting weirder and weirder. Whose phone is it? Get out here. Di Zheng Guangshou roared, his eyes scarlet, unable to restrain his anger. But he immediately reacted. Oh, it's mine. Then it's fine. He bent down and took out his phone from the pocket of his dead subordinate. He looked down at the caller ID and saw that it was an unknown number. He coldly picked it up. Hello. Which one? If it's the guy who collects TV fees from Tokyo Electric Company, then be prepared to die. What answered him was a low voice with a strange accent. It's me, good friend, Yevgeny. On the other end of the phone, the Russian Federation person seemed to take a deep breath. After a short silence, he let out a dazed and carefree moan. He let out a long breath. He said, "We have a business deal that we can talk about." Zhang Guangshou's eyes turned, and his fierce expression gradually became meaningful. "The key is, how do you want to talk about it? Mr. Good Friend." "Someone will talk to you," the good friend said. "I'm just a middleman. You just need to receive them." After that, he hung up the phone. In the silence, he heard a voice behind him. How pitiful! He's still not dead after 7 or 8 shots in a row. Full of pity, the man who suddenly appeared here looked down at the pair of eyes, full of hope and desire. It was unknown whether it was pity or mockery, but unexpectedly, there was no sense of abruptness. It was as if he had always been here, but they didn't notice. Black hair, black eyes, white skin. He always had a distant and polite smile like a Roman, but he spoke standard Ingzhou as if he grew up in Japan. He wore a traditional Ingzhou robe. After a burst of noise, he was instantly surrounded by layers of people. Behind the crowd, Zhang Guangshou raised his pistol expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who is it? Didn't I just say on the phone? The person who came to talk business with you is really rude. He doesn't know how to treat a guest at all." The visitor shook his head, seemingly helpless. He raised his hand slightly and said, "Please wait a moment. I really can't stand it anymore." He waved his hand casually, as if he was dismissing irrelevant people. The man lowered his head, slowly bent down, and stared at the twitching Kyoto in the pool of blood. "It's very painful, isn't it?" he asked softly. The dying man on the ground widened his eyes and stretched out his hand with all his strength. "Please save me. I will save you, don't worry." After saying those words, a brilliant smile appeared on the newcomer's face. He reached out and hugged the upper body in the pool of blood. Holding his neck, he softly whispered in his ear, "The so-called death is not something to be afraid of. It is the result of a long and peaceful sleep, the result of peace." "Don't be afraid," he said. "It will be over soon." There was a cracking sound. With the gentle action, the pain was ended. The despair of the deceased disappeared and was replaced by a peaceful smile, as if he had walked into the land of dreams. Yamamasa Mitsuwaki's expression twitched. In that moment of trance, he seemed to see something like a phantom rising from the pool of blood and floating into the sky, as if it had ascended to heaven. That person's neck had clearly been broken, but the corpse in the pool of blood on the ground was intact, and even the bullet hole had disappeared. In this sudden shock, the strange visitor had already stood up from the pool of blood and smiled brightly. "Okay, Mr. Yamamasa Mitsuwaki, we can talk now." Dead silence. Obviously, under the protection of many subordinates, Yamamasa Mitsuwaki suddenly felt a chill, as if he was alone. He should have immediately pulled the trigger and drawn a clear line with this kind of person who came from an unknown origin and spoke nonsense, but his movements paused for a moment. "I think, after playing the role of a comedian for so long, you must be tired, right?" He heard the words from the man. "Don't you want to get rid of the suppression of the looming hall and become the true underground king of Kyoto?" That pair of pitch-black eyes looked at him. With a smile that seemed to be eternal, he quietly admired. Inexplicably, he recalled the old priest in the church who advised him every time he gave alms when he was a child, "You can't talk to the devil." But now, when he finally understood this principle, he realized that it was already too late. He had already sunk deep into the mud. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Huaichi group drew a circle in the inner circle of Danbua. It was about 1/10 the size of the inner circle of Danbua. Including the territory of the Huai-Chi group, there were a total of 7 blocks. With the help of the Jinchuan Society and other Green Sun factions, most of the manpower was borrowed and all the work was coordinated. Then, the order was reestablished. In addition to setting aside an area to temporarily rent to those who had encountered disasters and were homeless, new rules were re-emphasized, and all violent conflicts were put an end to. Ruata Mountain of the Huai-Chi group personally came forward and conveyed to the representatives of each block and the leaders of all walks of life that, including robbery and theft, all the chaotic acts that were born and nourished by the turmoil in the inner circle of Donbua were listed as prohibited matters. There were no complicated rules, but a simple sentence: let bygones be bygones. From today onwards, plunder once, break your hand, twice break your 2 hands, steal fingers, kill with your life. The loophole was not small. As long as they stole 11 times, or snatched 3 times, and killed 2 people, they would make a profit. They could not be punished at all. Such hypocrisy and pretentiousness was truly nauseating. Did they really think that the inner circle of Donbua was their own home? They could do whatever they wanted, except for a few people who were really about to reach a dead end, who had expectations. More people obeyed on the surface, but they were sneering in their hearts, guessing what medicine the Huai-Chi group was selling in their gourd. There were many people who expressed their dissatisfaction with this. Whether it was the loan shark company, the brothel keeper, the violent gang on the block, or the other gangs and societies that involved their own interests. For a time, there was an uproar, but their dissatisfaction was useless. The higher-ups of the alliance did not care at all. Even the Huangchuan family, who disliked the Huai-Chi group the most, remained silent. They were too lazy to care. They just watched them build a tall building and then waited for it to collapse. Sheng Tianmu, who had eaten 2 extra bowls of rice in the hospital, just wiped his mouth and said that it was a good thing that the young people wanted to make a difference. He could not dispel their enthusiasm. Moreover, the inner circle of Donbua should be controlled now. When the economy was affected by the turmoil and all the gray industries began to wither, the order that was barely maintained became riddled with holes. The trash waiting to take drugs and the local tyrants waiting to be drained began to take risks. In just 2 days, countless things had happened. Sheng Tianmu took this opportunity to be ruthless. He was even more ruthless than the Huai-Chi group. Before evening, the funeral parlors in the inner circle of Donbua had already started to line up for cremation. After a long 10 hours, the gradually worsening atmosphere in the circle finally stopped, but no one knew how long it would last. In the office, Huaisher picked up his teacup expressionlessly. After sending away another wave of annoying flies, he rubbed his swollen eyebrows. It felt like he was reaping what he sowed. The arrival of order did not restore the vitality of the block. It even caused a lot of people to leave and migrate. The chaos caused by this had not subsided until now. But to his surprise, he thought that young Master Ming's destiny would be affected after his extreme actions caused chaos in the circle. But to his surprise, it didn't affect her at all. Instead, Great Master Ming's conversion speed increased by a huge margin. Although it was better than nothing, it was still ridiculous. Can this count as a dead person's death? Huaisher felt a wave of unease wash over her. Could it be that the rules he set not only did not improve the atmosphere in the block, but also caused deaths and injuries? That could not be right. Since this morning, only 6 people had died under the surveillance of the Crows, and they were all people who took advantage of the chaos to commit arson. You've walked into the wrong area again, silly boy. As Huaisher's heart skipped a beat, a voice that often appeared at the same time as text messages rang in his ears. Tangi! He was stunned. What a surprise. I didn't expect you to improve so quickly after coming back from a trip. As the ink converged, the image of a cute crow appeared in front of him. She wiped the corners of her eyes with relief. You've grown up? Why sure? Why sure reacted and immediately rolled his eyes. He snorted in disdain. You still know how to come back? Look at what you're saying. I have my own business too. Tangi's tone became subtle, sounding weak and pitiful. I can't always be locked in the basement by you and do this and that, right? Who is doing what to whom? Can you please make it clearer? Huaishur glared at her, then stood up weakly. Forget it. Let's not talk about it. What's the wrong area you mentioned just now? I was just about to say it, but you interrupted me. Tangi wanted to talk about something else, but Huaishur stared at her silently. She could not help but shrug helplessly, put on her small glasses, and then took out a small whiteboard and placed it on the table. The long-awaited lesson of Little Crow had begun. Chapter 768. Then, let us return to the essence of the path of heaven's inquisition. Tangi tapped on the whiteboard and wrote the word sharing on it with a quill-like object. From the beginning to the end, from level 1 to level 5, all stigmata cores are built around sharing. Its performance is to use its own power to gradually interfere with the outside world from the inside out. The quill pen then wrote on the whiteboard, Een Souls, Mountain Ghosts, Young Arbiter of Life. At the beginning, negative origin substances are used to establish the foundation. And then the mountain ghosts restore vitality. After forming an ecosystem, a large group is raised. Even if you take Xiangjuan's branch path, it's still the same at this point. It's just that the type of the large group changes from the mountains to the sea. Tangi paused for a moment and asked, You can understand now, right? Huaishur nodded. Then, after the large group multiplies and spreads, it will bring about a new problem. Tangi said jokingly, An overly strong ecosystem will have a strong impact on the outside world, just like how wild rabbits invaded Australia before they were bombed, and how dendrobium flourished in Indonesia. Overly violent interference will bring about unpredictable consequences. In other words, you will become an invasive species. Tangi told him, The infernal realm is an infernal realm in the first place. If you don't do anything about it, it will definitely affect the balance of the realm due to the increase in distortion. Also, the decline after the peak is normal, and the large group itself can't continue for long. What? Huaishur was stunned. I'm affecting the balance of the ecosystem? For example, it's just a possible consequence. But if you don't manage it and let it flow on its own, it will definitely reach this point in the end. The only difference is whether it's fast or slow. Seeing Huaishur's confused expression, Tangi thought for a moment and gave another example. It's like you gathered a group of fans and formed an official Paradise Prince fan club group. Moreover, those passionate fans will spontaneously promote you, spreading like a virus, 1 spreading to 10, 10 spreading to 100. As a result, there are more and more people and more and more. Unfortunately, the good times don't last. Tongji's smile became playful. Unknowingly, you've realized that your fans are becoming more and more aggressive. Not only do they control and bully your fans on the internet, but they're also trolling people who don't like you or don't want to be your fans. They're attacking you, causing your reputation to get worse and worse. And this trend gradually spread to the real world. In the end, you realized that you had lost your friends, your job, and your social life. All you had left was your fans. Other than that, the entire world has become your enemy. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air, dumbfounded. It can't be, right? Even he didn't dare to deny it completely. What's the difference between this and an illegal cult? He asked in shock. Tongji asked in confusion, is the relationship between a fan and an idol fundamentally different from the relationship between a believer and a deity? The difference is nothing more than the names of the support funds and flowers. If you go out and take 7 steps in each direction in the Huaisher group and tell them that you're actually the reincarnation of the revered one, do you think Shangye will kneel on the ground and kowtow to you? Isn't this a little too exaggerated? Do you think that's the only problem? There's more. Huaisher. Without waiting for Huaisher to react, Tongyi continued, there's something even more serious. Not only will they expand wildly, but they will also lose control internally. It's possible that in the beginning, a crow posted an edged picture in the Cage of Dreams, and you didn't notice. Then the second person followed suit, and the third person, and the fourth person. In the end, the crow will exchange all kinds of strange Ingzhou booklets and download links in the Cage of Dreams every day. Every day, their minds will be filled with pornography, and they will communicate with each other about their strange habits, becoming more and more perverted. At this point, Huaisher's face had already turned green. Tongyi changed the topic. Or, under the instigation of some people, everyone will start to be dissatisfied with everything that exists and attack the Astronomy Association's strategy. The Directorate of Governance is bloated, the Continuation Institute is full of red deer, the archaeological team is full of bones in the tomb, and the technical department is full of trash. We should let our brother Huaisher do something. All right, don't say any more. Huaisher subconsciously pinched her beak and sucked in a dozen breaths of cold air, almost trembling in fear. He couldn't believe it. You're not going to court death like that, are you? What do you think? Tongyi turned into smoke and crawled out from between her fingers. She reformed and combed her feathers. Guess how many young arbiters like you woke up and found that their flocks were gone? Huaisher was speechless. So, at this time, we need a manager to stand up and be merciless. Tongyi stood on Huaisher's shoulder and whispered into his ear. She held up her little wings and made a throat-slitting gesture. No matter if it's the person who posted the pornographic pictures or the disharmonious elements that instigated the chaos, all of them must die. Now, do you understand what Great Arbiter of Fate is? Huaisher heard his jaw drop to the ground. Indeed, Young Arbiter of Fate represents growth and life, while Great Arbiter of Fate represents decline and death. But in the path of heaven's inquisition, Great Arbiter of Fate's destiny is not simply to kill people, but to eliminate the calamities so that more people can live. Tongyi told him it has the ability to deter and attack the outside world, and at the same time, it also has the ability to rule and suppress the inside world. When there is an environmental threat in the outside world, it must stand up and eliminate the threat to prevent the calamity from descending. When there is a calamity in the inside world, it must be eliminated to prevent the inside world from going out of control. Maintaining the cycle of the inside and outside world, treating the race as a whole, and ensuring its safe and healthy growth. Now, do you know why Great Arbiter of Fate is said to be targeting his own people? Huaisher's brain twitched. Instantly, countless vivid and lively images from movies appeared in his mind. The National Security Agency, Dragon Group, Kika, FBI, KGB, MI9, the Lubyanka Hotel provides food and accommodation. That's right. Tanguy patted his shoulder in satisfaction. The development and protection of the children and the race from nothing, and even death and erasure when necessary. From this point of view, young arbiter of fate and great arbiter of fate's divinity are originally one, and because of this, there is a possibility of conversion before the fourth level. As long as what you do is consistent with this point, the conversion of great arbiter of fate's divinity will become smoother and smoother. In silence, Huaisher lowered his head and couldn't help but lift up the cage of dreams in front of him. Looking at the crows, looking at the small booklets, drawing cards, and doing pornography, his murderous intent rose. The bird cage is dirty again. Huaisher was sharpening his knife to prepare for the first crow purge rectification campaign. After the lesson on Little Crow's knowledge ended, Tanguy did not sneak a look at Huaisher's account balance. Instead, she magically pulled out a thick stack of documents from the air and placed it on the table. Huaisher picked it up curiously and looked at it carefully. He saw that the title was not in Chinese or Ingzhou, but in Latin. Beast Characteristics, Human Rights Protection Draft. He frowned and looked at the time under the cover. He found that it was actually more than a decade ago, and the logo on the document was actually from the American genealogy. What is this? As mentioned before, it's about the Farbach incident. I checked and found out. TSK, what a tragedy. Tanguy sat on the Crimson God's wedge and sighed. Why are your friends so unlucky? I think there's something wrong with you. Bad luck attracts bad luck, you know? Huaisher subconsciously stopped moving and looked serious. Cut the crap. Hurry up. When you're useful, you call me Sister Crow. When you're in a hurry, you don't even call me sister. Just like this. Hurry up. Tanguy shook her head and did not keep him in suspense. It started about 12 years ago. At that time, the American genealogy wanted to have an advantage in the development of the abyss. They vigorously absorbed border capital and had the intention of opening up the citizenship policy for hybrids. Under the relentless promotion of Yu Dongri in the Astronomy Society, the Foreign Affairs Director of the American Genealogy decided to have an official meeting with one of the leaders of the hybrids at the border. The location was Farbach at the border. In fact, before this, the two sides had contacted each other countless times in private. From probing to formal negotiations, even the draft had been revised. Under the situation where both sides had political and survival needs, although there were some bumps, they did not pose any obstacles. During this period, your friend, as the representative of the Astronomy Society, acted as the middleman. It can be said that he contributed a lot. But unfortunately, the problem arose in this meeting. Tanguy sighed with pity. The element of destruction came. Under the interference of the extremists, Farbach had long been infiltrated by the ranchers. When America opened the border and discovered the projection of paradise, it was already too late. Even the Bifrost could not stop the deepening of the depth. If the American genealogy did not react quickly and cut off the connection with Farbach, most of America might have been affected by the abyss tide. In the end, Farbach sank into hell. The American genealogy paid the price for their kindness and suffered heavy losses. No one mentioned the draft of human rights and the hybrid's citizenship policy again. And because of their own abyss characteristics, the situation became more and more bleak. Yu Dongri's resonance physique was completely burned out in that incident, and he lost the qualification to be an apocalypse sentinel. In the end, he was cursed and was sent to the Dark Army. It was also from that time that he changed from Phoenix to Farbach's soul. It's as if a part of him had already died in Feuerbach. What's left is just an empty shell, a soul that's long dead. In Huaisher's silence, Tangi sighed softly. Logically speaking, he should have completely lost the ability to jump through time, but he can use this power more frequently and crazily than before. It's really incredible. After all, it's a miracle that he can still move after falling to this extent. It's not surprising when he completely collapses. The rancher's curse. Huaisher recalled the dirty black blood in Reynolds' body, which was like the precipitation of all the malice in the world, the palpitating, corrosive, and destructive power. Rather than calling it a curse, isn't it more appropriate to call it saliva? The remaining traces after escaping from the mouth of the gods. Tangi sneered. In comparison, the curse problem and his own problem, I really don't know which is more serious. He hates himself too much, and he can't bear the guilt. He's living like a walking corpse, and there's not a day that he doesn't repent. Why, sure, he's living in the hell he created, and there's no cure for him. The more glorious the star, the bigger the black hole formed once it dies. The guys in hell love this kind of soul the most. Once it solidifies, it's definitely a rare fallen star in history. The question is, how long can he last? How long can you last, Yu Dongri? In his drowsy sleep, Yu Dongri heard a mocking voice. He subconsciously raised his gun and saw a familiar figure. Under the gorgeous oil paper umbrella, the complicated 12 lines of Ingzhou set off the Roman-style face, which was as beautiful as a peach and plum like a legendary courtesan. Black eyes and long black hair. His smile was so gentle, but it also made people feel that he was very far away. Yu Dongri didn't answer. In the silence, the sound of a mobile phone vibrating came from the narrow safe room. The screen of the mobile phone on the table lit up, and Huaisher's name appeared. Aren't you going to answer the phone? The caller asked. Your friend is very concerned about you. Yu Dongri raised his gun indifferently, aimed at her face, and said word by word, this has nothing to do with you. How many times has it been? The caller looked down at him with pity. You won't win this time, Yu Dongri. You should learn to give up. Perseverance won't only bring you victory, but it will also bring you deeper into hell. Bang! A gunshot sounded. It pierced through that pretty face, causing it to burst apart like a bubble. I haven't lost yet. Yu Dongri said goodbye coldly. It's okay. Before the bubble dissipated, he said goodbye gently. I'll wait forever. Chapter 769. Yu Dongri had disappeared again. After a day of phone calls, Huaisher finally confirmed this point at 9 o'clock in the evening. To be exact, he learned from Sheng Tianmu's family that Miss Li Hua had gone out yesterday and hadn't returned yet. He didn't pick up his calls, didn't reply to his WeChat messages, and couldn't find her anywhere. It was like a man who suddenly said that he had to go on a business trip with a beautiful female boss, but due to limited budget, he only booked one room. What the hell is this bastard doing? Huaisher held his phone and was angry. Oh, what the hell does the time jumper want to do? This is one of the top 10 difficult questions in the world. The difficulty is probably second only to, what is your girlfriend thinking? Tangi sighed. He's probably hiding from you. After all, he's a time jumper. If he wants to find someone, he always has a way. In other words, if he doesn't want to be found, I'm afraid that no matter how much time you spend, it will be a waste of effort. Once you enter that state for a long time, your thinking will gradually become different from ordinary people. You'd better not take it for granted. It was like the world in the eyes of a painter was different from ordinary people, and musicians were more sensitive to sound. This was the difference brought about by a long time of immersion. Ordinary people's thinking relied on their senses, and their senses were limited by their own body structure and cognition. They couldn't break through the ordinary framework to think about the world in the eyes of a time jumper. They couldn't get close to their thinking. When the continuity of time was interrupted, the cause and effect that ordinary people relied on would be clear at a glance. In the countless intricate changes, no one knew where the node Yu Dongri was focusing on was, and no one knew what kind of result he was looking for. Perhaps he had long since lost himself in this endless cycle. Time jumping and changing the future had always been two different things. All along, the time jumpers of Bifrost had been facing a paradox full of ridicule. The more they wanted to change, the more they would consume. If a matter wasn't serious enough to require a time jump, then there was no need to make a time jump and pay a higher price. However, if a matter had already reached a point where it could no longer be salvaged, it would most likely be useless even if one were to use another time jump. Rome wasn't built in a day. Even if they basked in the sun for one more day, the avalanche was still unavoidable. With Yu Dongri's efforts alone, no matter how many times he went back, he would not be able to change the tide. Reality isn't a game. Why, sure. Even if cheating can solve the problem, I've never heard of a happy ending by cheating. Tangi said with pity, even if it's a miracle, there are things that can't be changed. In the end, he suddenly threw the matter of the alliance to me like it was a mess, and then he patted his butt and left. Huaisher slammed the table, unable to restrain his anger. What kind of F***king logic is this? Do I have to work hard to gather everyone to pray for him and hope that he'll be fine? Tangi did not say anything. He just looked at him, sympathetically, until he fell silent again. In fact, if Yu Dongri could just leave and obediently receive treatment, Huaisher would feel more at ease. But would he really escape? In other words, would that guy turn back from the path of death? It was said that birds of a feather flocked together. How could Huaisher not know what the bald man was thinking in his head? He would definitely pretend to be cool even when he was about to die. Come on, brother, I'll do what I have to do. I'll leave the rest to you. In the silence, Huaisher suddenly felt a burst of loneliness and uneasiness. When Yu Dongri entrusted him with great trust, Huaisher finally felt the fear and confusion he had experienced before. Tangi. Huaisher leaned on the chair tiredly and suddenly whispered, if I finally fail completely here and lose everything, will you be disappointed in me? Maybe. I don't like people who overestimate themselves. Tangi looked at his eyes and asked curiously, but Huaisher, even if you fail in the end, will you regret everything you've done now? Huaisher did not answer. So Tangi chuckled softly. So happy. Very good. Huaisher, you really are the best contractor in the world. With the disappearance of the flying bird, a pair of gentle hands stroked his cheeks, hugged him from behind, and softly declared, just do it, Huaisher, she said. No matter what the result is, I will bear witness to you, just like you bear witness to me. That was the initial agreement between them. The road sign was activated again. 31. In the morning, he had to clean up the living room before opening the door. At noon, he was responsible for delivering food. After Ms. Tomoko stayed behind to help, his task became delivering takeout. He had to deliver lunch to the Yakuza uncles who looked very fierce. In the afternoon, the lady boss would teach him knife skills and cooking skills, so he had to study hard. When it was almost nighttime, he found that the roof began to leak again, so he volunteered to carry wooden planks and tools and climb up to the roof. After quickly replacing the wooden planks and mending the bottom, Makoto put down the hammer in satisfaction and wiped the sweat off her forehead. She proudly put her hands on her hips. On the roof of the izakaya's third floor, as the sun gradually set in the distance, the entire city seemed to be covered in a layer of dim glory. The sound of children crying could be heard in the distance, and scattered lights in the shabby apartment building lit up. It looks a bit lonely. She sighed softly. Hey, Maki, come down, don't be in a daze. Behind the house, Tomoko looked up at the girl who was about the same age as her and shouted, "It's dangerous, come down first." "Don't worry, it's nothing. Tomoko, be careful." Maki waved her hand indifferently, picked up the toolbox, and walked towards the ladder with the planks. Then she slipped. "Why is there a pair of pliers here?" "Oh, right, I think I dropped it." The world was spinning, and before Shin could react, she had already fallen into the ground in the backyard. There was a loud bang. Satoko was stunned. Subconsciously, she rushed up to take a look. However, as soon as she took a step forward, she saw the toolbox on the roof fall down and hit Makoto's head. Makoto, who had just gotten up, fell down again. And then there were the planks piled up on the edge of the roof and the ladder. It was like a scene from a cartoon. The chain reaction continued, and the backyard was instantly in a mess. So this is where today's bad luck comes from. In the dust, Maki opened her eyes, coughed, and got up. Next to him, Tomoko was already stunned. Although she already knew that Maki's bad luck would often be off the charts in the past few days, but for it to be this ridiculous, it could only be compared to a few days ago, when a gas pipe exploded while walking on the street. "Maki, are you all right?" "Ahem, I'm fine. Don't worry, I'll clean this place up. Let's talk about that later. Isn't it more important to check if there are any wounds first?" Tomoko moved the ladder and planks away, and found that although she looked terrible, she only twisted her ankle a little, and there wasn't even a single wound on her body. She had copper skin and iron bones. "That's ridiculous." Tomoko was stunned. "I always feel like you're the kind of person who can swim back to shore by yourself after being thrown into the Pacific Ocean. That's too ridiculous. It's impossible." Maki waved her hand, awkwardly. "When the ship crashed last time, I almost couldn't swim back to Kyushu from the 5 islands. Oh, fortunately, I met Uncle Takahashi at the port. Otherwise, I don't know what to do." Tomoko was stunned, and she felt that it was ridiculous from the bottom of her heart. They were both mixed race, but the gap between them was so huge. Seeing that Maki had begun to clean up the things on the ground, she shook her head hard and pulled her up. "Anyway, go take a shower first. We'll talk about the things in the yard tomorrow." Half an hour later, Maki, who had finally finished cleaning up, changed into Tomoko's clothes and dried her hair. She was full of vitality again. "I really envy you. It seems like you'll never run out of strength." Tomoko pinched the corners of her muscles on her arms and her firm and flat belly and looked helpless. "I can't even run a few steps now, and I have to pant when going upstairs." "Do you think I used to be in the track and field club?" "Tomoko, you're a literary girl. Don't worry about it." Maki grinned and went to the kitchen to prepare for work. But when she passed by the front desk, her eyes were attracted by the person in front of the door. An old woman came to visit with a smile on her face, holding the hand of the proprietress and saying something enthusiastically. The proprietress responded helplessly, but she didn't listen to her no matter what. "What does that person do?" Maki whispered. "The granny in the fruit shop across the street seems to have joined a nearby fraternity recently, and she became like a salesperson. In the past few days, she came every day to waste people's time, and she didn't listen to me no matter what." Tomoko shrugged helplessly. But when the old woman saw Tomoko come down, her smile became more enthusiastic, and she wanted to go around the proprietress. Until the proprietress stopped her and said a few words with a serious expression. She was stunned for a moment and left embarrassedly. Before she left, she put a bottle of medicine on the counter and encouraged Tomoko to study hard from afar before she turned around and left. After watching her leave, the proprietress sighed helplessly, picked up the medicine bottle from the table, and shook it. There were a few pills in the bottle, but there was no label or ingredients on the outside. It looked strange. "What is this?" Maki curiously went up to the bottle. It says it's a painkiller, and it can alleviate the complications of animal characteristics, but there isn't even a label or an instruction manual. The proprietress shook her head and sighed. And then she came to a realization. She turned around and said to Maki, seriously, Maki, you have to be careful. If you feel uncomfortable, remember to tell me. Don't take medicine of unknown origin. This kind of medicine can only be used according to the doctor's instructions after the doctor has opened the kitchen. Ah, Auntie Jean Jiang, don't worry, I've always been in good health. Makai laughed and struck a pose of strength. Jean Jiang looked at her suspiciously and reminded her again and again, after making sure that she wouldn't be stupid enough to take medicine of unknown origin. She was relieved. After that, she wiped the table, cleaned the counter, and so on. There was still a lot of work waiting for Maki. Recently, all the helpers and apprentices in the shop seemed to have resigned, and a lot of work fell on her. However, those who responded to her request had their salaries increased by a lot. In between work, Maki turned around and looked at the medicine bottle that the proprietress had thrown into the trash can. She couldn't help but sneeze. What a strange smell. It was like a stew that had been left out for a long time. Even if it could fill her stomach, wouldn't it give her a stomachache? Maki, come and cut the vegetables. A voice called out from the kitchen. Okay. Maki turned around For Maki, and ran it was to still the a busy kitchen. day with plenty She to didn't eat. notice the strange As the twilight atmosphere on the gradually street at all. faded. Dark clouds gradually appeared in the sky, and faint thunder could be heard in the distance. Not long after, a heavy rain poured down. The heavy curtain of rain and the loud noise covered the rising flames in the distance. Chapter 770. It's going to rain. Take care, everyone. In front of the fraternity's dilapidated entrance, a middle-aged man patiently handed out umbrellas and reminded the participants, "It's been a bit chaotic outside recently. If you're not free, don't come. If you need, you can stay here for the time being. The plum rain season has arrived. Every year at this time, Doctor, I feel sticky it's already and hard for you to take care of so many patients. And legs hurt the participants so much. All looks like I'm really getting old. Let's not trouble you. Why sure should have said something just like one the more president bed. Was still in his Dr. prime, but he couldn't help but nod his head in agreement he stood as he in the looked rain, at the wrinkles watching on the old face. Man and children leave. When one after is a long old, time, one just as he was about to turn back and give up one's position, hurried your footsteps in the hospital. Why don't you give me the position of the president of the middle-aged woman cried Let hoarsely. Me experience her disheveled hair was stuck to her face to be the president and her prematurely aged face after waiting for a long time. He Dr. found Godlike. Why sure only is Dr. Godlike here? Yes, I beg you. And looked straight at him. Save my child. Of expectation. She lifted the raincoat made of plastic bags. Wanted to roll his eyes. Carefully picked up the child. I've waited my whole life to be the president of the alliance. The child I planned to be the president 12 years old until I died. Had already lost consciousness from the fever. His red face was twisted and stiff and covered in herpes. Why sure thought his skinny limbs were already deformed. President. Large patches of skin had fallen off. You should make arrangements and blood for your kept seeping out. As soon as some possible. Parts had been torn apart. Leave the from burden the of the alliance and to a young and was promising out. Person like progressive myositis. Young people should work more. The doctor and dream less. You should go to the hospital. Was too lazy to pay attention to him. Of a fever. He touched his pocket. Why did you come so late? And found that he was wearing a hospital gown. I don't have a job. He pointed to the bedside table to find a job in the Fujian district to open it. I just went out for a while. He found a heavy pistol inside. The wretched woman was tried to explain herself. He looked at the pistol, and then the doctor pulled her up from the ground. What was the meaning of this? Prepare for the operation first. Want him to help him end his life? Of the essence. His hair stood on, and when he was stared at by that very quick gaze, the nurse and assistant rushed out from behind the door. Why did this bastard dream of getting rid of the big boss every day for the operation and taking over his position? The doctor paused for a moment. If you continue to be like this, around and I'll have to ask softly to the dazed woman to come in. There's not much hope. Being stroked again. I hope you're ready. And again, the woman became angry. In the rain, help me take out the on her face was gradually washed away like sand. It was a key with a house. It was impossible to tell what kind of expression held it in his she had left behind. And thought for a long time. After a long time, she squatted weakly on the ground and sighed and let out a sharp cry. Don't be afraid. Everyone will be saved soon. It's something prepared in the early years. Turned his back to her as a result. Said softly, the older I get, the more timid I become. It's only the woman's hoarse cries could be heard in the silence and sighed in the distance. On the rooftop, talking about the torrential rains, to be on the safe side, I'll give you this thing just the rations in silence. Originally, one had a lot after another, but she calmly swallowed the last made him a little surprised. He looked down. The situation is already. He did not say a word. You've been busy with your in the ward territory these 2 days. Tianmu, you didn't pay attention to anything else at all. He raised his eyes and looked out of the window, thought for a moment, and suddenly said, "The Yamatagumi was completely wiped out in the morning." Huaisher frowned. He recalled the old man he had dealt with before. He was smart, capable, and cautious. He was also one of the most cunning people in the alliance. When he was dealing with the Tiger King group's inheritance, he severely cheated him. Now, the whole group was wiped out. They died just like that. In the 2 days when Huaisher was tidying up his territory, the war between the alliance and other gangs had already begun in full swing. Although a full-scale war didn't break out, local conflicts continued. Vendettas, assassinations, attacks, and revenge were common. Now, there were very few people strolling on the streets. They were all afraid of being involved in the revenge of the Iron King group. What about the aftermath? Huaisher asked. Akaki has already done it. Don't worry, Sheng Tianmu said. Since you have the intention to set up a shelter in the inner circle of Danbua, then do it well. If there are victims, I will also ask him to send them over. The turmoil this time might be your opportunity. It was precisely under the high pressure of the president that Huaishir was able to soar like a rocket. However, his foundation was still unstable. If Huaishir could really take advantage of this opportunity to complete the gathering of people's hearts, it might not be an empty promise that he would be the next president in the future. Huaishir looked down at the key in his hand. After listening to Sheng Tianmu's arrangement, he realized that this old man was really grooming him as his successor. He couldn't help but feel a little touched. He said, "I won't stay for long. When this matter is over, I might not stay for long." It's always a way out, isn't it? Sheng Tianmu couldn't be bothered with the things that Huaishir was hiding. He waved his hand and said, "Do your work well first. Don't think too much. If you mess it up, this old man might be the first to give the order to kill you." Huaishir said goodbye and got up. Just as he was about to leave, he couldn't help but turn back and ask, "Lu, cough, cough, did Liwa say anything before she left? For example, what she left for me?" "How would I know?" Sheng Tianmu glanced at him with a strange expression. "Although I've never cared about the affairs of young people, you'd better not be too presumptuous. The real Li Hua was still at the border. All of you stop harming the reputation of his obedient daughter. Otherwise, how could she get married in the future?" Other things aside, that feeling of disdain was completely conveyed through his eyes. Huaishir chuckled, bid farewell, and left. In the ward that had returned to silence, Sheng Tianmu sighed. After thinking for a moment, the old man suddenly looked up. "Tamada-san, help me get the phone." After leaving Kashihara Hospital, Ueno drove slowly in the heavy rain. Even with the windshield wipers turned on, it was still difficult to see clearly under the washing of the rain. After deliberately choosing a remote road, there were not many cars on the empty street. It was so quiet that it was like passing through a flooded world. But during this short break, Huaishir suddenly looked up. In the storm outside, the steel crow circling in the sky caught a glimpse of a strange figure that flew through the air like a ghost. The moment it caught a glimpse, it saw a strand of something that looked like a woman's hair suddenly fly out of the shadow and pierce through the crow's eyes from hundreds of meters away, tearing it apart. An instant later, the crow was reborn in the cage of dreams through the return of origin substance. It cawed, angrily, unable to fly into a rage. "Ueno, break." Just as he was speaking, Huaishir saw the strange shadow descend from the sky. Under the flickering street lights in the storm, it suddenly landed on the road. Countless hair-like strands of twisted hair extended from its body, wriggling wildly. Immediately afterwards, under the wriggling hair, thousands of pairs of eyes suddenly opened, staring straight at Huaishir, who was speeding over a kilometer away. An evil light burst forth. Ambush! Stimulated by the premonition of death, Huaishir reached out and suddenly turned the steering wheel. The heavy car skidded in the rain and swerved randomly. It wobbled and slammed into a wall. Half of the car broke through the gate and rushed into a shop that had long since closed down. The sound of the car collapsing could be heard. It was as if thousands of sharp blades had slashed at it. The back half of the car that had been grazed by the evil light instantly fell apart. Huaishir kicked Ueno out of the car that was about to explode. He opened the door and stepped on the burning gasoline on the ground as he walked towards the figure that was getting closer and closer after the storm. Under the protection of the countless hair-like tentacles, the constantly opening and closing vicious eyes stared fixedly at Huaishir. A hoarse voice seemed to come from the tremors of the rain. "Paper doll." Huaishir had just nodded and didn't even have time to reply when he felt the premonition of death suddenly burst forth. After the ground beneath his feet trembled, a sharp, pitch-black hair suddenly broke through the restraints of the ground and tangled around him. When he dodged to the side, he saw the wriggling hair suddenly contract. Between the hair, an ice-cold eye slowly opened, and a gaze filled with malice shone on his face. Ingzhou lineage, level 4, 100-eyed ghost. Chapter 771. Half an hour ago, in the evening, it was raining heavily. A van was parked at the back door of Izakaya. The young man who jumped out of the van in the rain took off his raincoat and bowed slightly to the lady boss who had been waiting for a long time. "Dinner for 80 people, please." "It's already been prepared." Ms. Jean Jiang pointed at the large thermal box next to her. "It's raining so heavily. Do you want to come in and drink some ginger soup?" "No need. Everyone in the group is still waiting for dinner. If they're hungry, those guys will get angry." The young man called Mr. Najima waved his hand embarrassedly and refused the lady boss's help. He wanted to pick up the box, but he couldn't. Instead, he almost sprained his back, and his face flushed red. "It's so heavy. It's dinner for 80 people, Mr. Najima. It's too much for you to handle by yourself." Before Ms. Jean Jiang finished speaking, the girl next to her reached out and easily lifted the box. She blinked her blank eyes. "It's not that heavy. Boss, where should I put this?" Ms. Jean Jiang's face stiffened. She wanted to pinch the face of this guy, who still couldn't see the air, and twist it a few times. Instead, the young man called Mr. Najima waved his hand carelessly. "Oh, this must be Miss Maki. I heard from that guy Uehara that you're very strong, but I didn't believe it. Please put it in the trunk for me." After putting the box in, Najima politely said goodbye and went back to the van while rubbing his back. In the rain, the van started. The driver laughed when he saw Mr. Najima's haggard appearance. "I told you it's heavy, and you didn't want my help." "Shut up." Najima rolled his eyes at him. After wiping the rain off his face, he turned off the noisy rock music on the radio, took out a notebook from his pocket, and continued to memorize words. "Hink, hink, Hinc, Astra, Astra, yes, Dra." Seeing how serious he was, the driver couldn't help but shake his head. "You're so hard-working. You memorized it in the morning and forgot it in the afternoon. What's the point of learning this stuff?" "I like it. It's none of your business." Niu Dao rolled his eyes at him. He kept the book in his hand and continued to recite silently. However, the person next to him seemed to be disturbing him and started singing loudly. Niu Dao was so angry that he kicked this bastard. "Enough, I'm looking after the car." His companion pushed him. "Don't disturb the driver." Boom! In the sweeping rain, a Land Rover suddenly roared out from the dark alley. It broke through the rain and suddenly smashed into the side of the van. With a loud bang, the world turned upside down. Niu Dao's vision turned black. He felt like he was being flung around like a rag, colliding violently. Fortunately, I wore a seatbelt. Otherwise, I would have been thrown out. When he woke up from his stupor, he saw his companion lying on the steering wheel. His head was bleeding, and he didn't know if he was dead or alive. F***CK. The airbag is broken. Niu Dao panted with difficulty and wanted to push his shoulder. Then he heard a sound outside the window. Someone knocked on the broken window, and a mocking smile appeared on the familiar face. "Mr. Niu Dao, you've been living a good life recently." The few people who came down from the Land Rover looked at him through the window. The leader, narrowed his eyes and grinned. You didn't even pick up the phone. Seems like you've really abandoned the dark and joined the light. Iron King faction. In an instant, he was stunned. His worries for the past few days surged into his heart. In his shock, Niu Dao was dumbfounded. Then he suddenly asked, "Why are you guys only here now?" Huh. The people from Iron King faction were also stunned. "I thought you guys had forgotten about me." Niu Dao pulled his seatbelt angrily and roared, "If you really want to do it, why don't you guys inform me in advance? F***CK. Just kill me as well." Huh. The people couldn't react in time. Then they became suspicious. "Why didn't you pick up the phone? Everyone's mobile phones have been confiscated. Okay? Didn't you see? Even I'm suspected." Niu Dao replied angrily, "Someone is watching me when I come out to take a meal. Otherwise, I would have poisoned the people from YG Group to death. Why would I need you guys?" Outside the car, a few people looked at each other. Then the leader reacted and squeezed out a happy smile. "Very good, Mr. Niu Dao. I wasn't wrong about you. I was wondering why a good man like Niu Dao would become a traitor. Are you guys going to launch a surprise attack on YG Group?" Niu Dao looked and volunteered. "I'll show you the way." "There's no need for that." The leader shook his head and pressed on the pistol in his pocket. Then he suddenly asked, "Where's YG Group?" "He went out." Niu Dao answered without hesitation. "He went to Luoha's house for a banquet. Now, YG Group is empty. There's not a single ascender." Before he could finish, a sinister voice sounded from behind the crowd. It was like a ferocious silhouette formed by countless squirming hairs. It spoke impatiently. "He's lying." In an instant, everyone looked at Niu Dao with a subtle expression. In the silence, Niu Dao stood rooted to the ground. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He only sighed. He raised his hand and gave the man outside the window a middle finger. "Eat **T. After a long groping, Niu Dao suddenly reached out and pulled out the pistol in his toolbox. He aimed at the face and pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out in the rain. Then it calmed down again. In front of the burning car, a hand made of countless hairs pulled Niu Dao out of the car. He only heard the sound of a phone. Hairs of strange in the distance. Eyes appeared then and stared at his face. An intense pain came crashing down like a tide. Niu Dao moment he was stared at by the eye at close range. Huaisher felt a vicious curse coiling around his soul like a snake. It quickly shrank and seeped into his soul. It invaded the sacred mark and bone burial sanctuary. It was immediately devoured by the rotten dream substance burning on the banner, becoming a part of the rotten dream substance in the dream cage. A miracle might not be useless in front of a stronger miracle, but once a curse met a stronger curse, it would be useless. Huaisher only felt his vision darken under the impact of the aftershock. Then the tip of his nose heated up and started bleeding. It looked like he had drunk too much ginseng chicken soup and had overnourished his body. His entire person was full of energy. Huaisher raised his hand and wiped the blood from his nose that was quickly diluting in the rain. He asked curiously, "What are you looking at?" The eye above the wriggling hair was stunned for a moment. Then, as if it didn't believe it, it looked again. Then, Huaisher became even more energetic. He couldn't help but laugh. "Are you here to attack me or to give me nourishment?" In the distance, the 100-eyed devils covered in hair were stunned for a moment. Then, their eyes became even more ferocious. "Boss, catch!" In the ruins of the house, behind the burning basket of the car, Wenno finally found the golf bag in the broken trunk of the car. After opening the bag, he pulled out a heavy katana and threw it at Huaisher with all his might. In midair, the sharp black hair swept past, and the katana was instantly broken in half. Then, thousands of pairs of evil eyes turned and looked indifferently in Ueno's direction. The moment the evil light burst forth, it discovered that Huaishi's face was already very close to it. He grinned and smiled. The sound of Emperor Yu's step breaking through the air exploded. The curtain of the torrential rain suddenly twisted, setting off a white wave. Then it saw the metal ball in Huaishi's hand that was as large as a human head. It was shiny and round, and even the clear sound of a mechanical watch ticking could be heard. Before it could get close, the countless eyes shrank, and thousands of sharp, evil lights swept in all directions. Then there was a loud explosion. A flash of light suddenly exploded. The improved recipe for Ramses' wrath had been added with a large amount of magnesium powder, and it instantly ignited, creating a scorching light that was as bright as the rising sun. The light, which was strong enough to scorch a normal person's eyes, only caused the 100-eyed demon's vision to darken for a moment. Then, a pungent smell spread out from the hot wind. The pungent smell of blood and alcohol mixed together. The pungent, poisonous wine turned into a mist that rose up in the storm. It was like a strong acid that looked down on the 100-eyed demon's hair, hissing. This was the inspiration he had gained after his duel with the bartender. Huaishi's own blood wine and metal explosives had been fused to create the culinary demon's alcohol bomb, after it had been infused with the origin substance from the Cage of Illusions. A thick mist instantly engulfed the area. A bubble of illusions covered reality, blocking all vision. However, it couldn't block the 100-eyed demon's gaze for long. After confirming that Ueno had escaped, Huaishi retreated without hesitation. However, he immediately discovered countless strands of wriggling hair floating in the air amidst the storm. The 100-eyed demon's lower stigmata, hair girl. Through the strands of hair, countless evil origin substances and curses could be stored and consumed. At this moment, the countless strands of hair actually wrapped around Huaishi's hand and began to furiously absorb his vitality. Huaishi was taken aback. He didn't feel anything. He just felt that the diameter of this water pipe was a little too small. Immediately afterwards, the strands of hair began to rapidly turn into fibers, turning into something like wood. Rot and poison began to spread. The numbness caused the strands of hair to twitch like flesh and blood. Then they quickly snapped in two. Within the fog of illusions, the 100-eyed demon howled angrily. Then he heard the savage cries of countless iron crows. The sharp sound of metal multiplying descended from the sky. A 9-meter long machete descended from the sky. It howled with hatred. The scarlet blade instantly cut through the countless wriggling strands of hair. It ignored the strands of hair and began to absorb the origin substance from the Tier 4 ascended cultivator. From within the fog of illusions, a confused voice could be heard. You don't think that you're the only one who knows how to absorb, do you? That can't be, right? That can't be, right? Beneath the countless strands of hair, the old face stared wide-eyed, its eyes bloodshot. A Tier 4 ascended cultivator had actually been defeated by a Tier 3 ascended cultivator for so long and had even been mocked in return. The veteran assassin from the Tomb of the Returnless was enraged. Countless strands of hair spread out from his body, and his entire body dissolved into a mass of hair monsters, waving countless tentacles about as they wrapped around the blade of illusions. Immediately afterwards, even more tentacles howled as they shot towards Huaishi. The blade of illusions instantly dissipated. Immediately afterwards, a brilliant flash of light burst forth. Chapter 772. The light from the virtuous sword exploded forth and swept across. Everywhere it passed, all of the negative origin substances sizzled under the heat of the sword. But at any moment, more hair would regrow, continuously depleting Huaishi's stamina and keeping him in place. Evil eyes continuously appeared from the hair, their cold gazes intersecting with each other like blades. With a loud boom, the abandoned buildings on both sides collapsed. Huaishi retreated step by step, but in his heart, he felt a sense of relief and realization. Fortunately, the one who came was not someone as strong as Great Azura Everly from the Eye of Nightmares. Otherwise, he would have died here today. Just as the furious hundred-eyed demon slowly emerged from the fog of dreams, he saw a look of realization on Su Chen's face. It was as if he couldn't believe it. He muttered in disbelief, "So there are people as weak as you in the fourth tier." In that moment of shock, the hundred-eyed ghost even suspected that he had misheard. However, when he saw the genuine look of relief on Huaishi's face, he felt an indescribable rage and indignation. Weak, he was separated by the enormous gap between the third tier and the fourth tier, and he was being looked down on by a little brat who was not even a fifth of his age. "Please, you're very weak." It wasn't a humiliation, but this kind of expression and words brought about 1,000 times more anger than humiliation. "Die!" Countless strands of black hair shook violently, spewing out like a fountain. He had completely liberated himself from his human form, turning into a torrent of darkness that swept across the area. Wherever the wriggling black hair passed, pairs of ferocious eyes opened from the ground, the water, the broken walls, and so on. The venomous eyes stared fixedly at Huaishi, and even seeped into the mist of dreams in reverse, eroding the mist. The giant eyes opened endlessly, sealing off all of the space he could escape. From the outside to the inside, they shrank inch by inch, until Huaishi snapped his fingers. Darkness surged like a tide, rising from his shadow and turning into a door. Then it opened with a loud bang. Countless crimson rays of light appeared from within. The bloodthirsty eye. Holy! The iron light surged, and the crow tide swept out. In the blink of an eye, it was as if a 10,000-foot tide was rushing out. "I almost forgot that there's such a move." Huaishi waved his hand. Instantly, the 9 rapping candle crows began to tremble. Their enormous bodies began to glow with rage, compassion, pain, and resentment. Every time they opened an eye, substance, another pair of eyes would be complete blind. The mighty crow every time they entangled a crow, launched a counterattack. 2 crows would against the hundred-eyed from their bindings. The iron every time they killed a crow, like knives. 2 crows would leave scars the entanglement of the opened eyes. The sharp claws he did not care about were sacrificing himself, and they madly attacked the open eyes. He was almost willing to sacrifice his life in exchange for the enemy's injuries. Even if he was strangled to death by a strand of hair or pierced by an evil eye, he would still return to the dream realm in the form of origin substance. When he saw the images being transmitted from the front lines by the crow tide, he was greatly stimulated. Accompanied by a desperate shriek, countless tears of blood flowed out from the broken eyes. They were like countless crimson streams that converged together, creating a sea of blood in the midst of the torrential rain. The wriggling hair swept across the ground, and the eyes that were born after the destruction began to glow with an evil light. After hatefully repelling the crow tide's attack, an old and savage figure appeared from within the pool of blood. His eyes were covered in cracks, and they spat out a hateful light. The old man howled madly, "You're not the paperman, Huaishi?" "I am the paperman, Huaishi." Huaishi shrugged. "It's just that. The paperman, Huaishi, isn't me." Behind him, within the shadows, the figure of a delicate young woman slowly appeared. The substitute named Paperman, Huaishi, opened her eyes, wielding the blade of hatred. Huaishi, on the other hand, once again pulled out the virtuous sword. 2 similar yet completely different faces looked up and smiled at the stunned hundred-eyed demon. Since we don't have to worry about exposing ourselves here, I'll use this move to play with you for a while. At that moment, the dream realm fog once again began to rise. Within the darkness of the bone-burying sanctuary, countless afterimages began to spread. The curse condensed from evil thoughts and depraved divinity. The tried and tested method of killing people was completely ineffective. When the curling hair of hatred, which was comparable to a sword, encountered an even sharper weapon, and the negative origin substance was countered by an even more mysterious and divine origin substance, the enraged hundred-eyed demon discovered that his claws and fangs were completely useless. However, before he could carefully analyze the situation, the two incredibly strange faces had already appeared on his left and right. Unrestricted state. Release. The rainwater turned into steam, rising into the air. U-step, combined with the drummer's technique, allowed the two weapons to perfectly coordinate with each other, creating a crisscrossing flash of light. A cross-shaped scar appeared in the air, accompanied by a shrill explosion. The old hundred-eyed demon's hands trembled, and two cracks appeared on the expensive border relics he was holding. He could feel the incredibly strange origin substance attacking him. However, before he could react, the two retreating figures suddenly shot through the air. Shadow Burial Shuttle. In an instant, the origin substance turned into a shadow, then reappeared from within the shadow. The ferocious iron hammer spat out a violent trail of flames as Motoko leapt into the air, smashing down on the hundred-eyed demon's head. Countless strands of hair formed a shield, blocking the attack. The demonic eye swept past, and a shattered figure appeared behind him. The spear of compassion had already pierced through all of the hundred-eyed demon's defenses. Along with the fragrance of iris flowers, the azure-crowned dragon's time poison pierced through the hundred-eyed demon's shoulder. As soon as the spear touched the demonic eye, it turned back into a shadow, dispersing under the demonic eye's gaze. After reassembling, the virtuous sword swept across the hundred-eyed demon's chest. A scorching light flashed, leaving behind a charred wound. At the same time, Motoko's fury axe had already been swung towards the hundred-eyed demon's defenseless neck. The chains of sorrow condensed in the air and instantly contracted, just like the countless strands of hair that had wrapped around Huaishi's body. The chains scraped against each other, causing sparks to fly everywhere. It had locked onto the hundred-eyed demon's critical moment. The flames of fury howled as a massive wound appeared on his neck. Immediately afterwards, the axe was entangled by the strands of hair that had extended from the wound. Thousands of strands of hair, filled with malice, shot out in all directions, tearing apart the shadows that were spreading out one by one. The ground shook, then shook again. As young Master Ming's afterimage was destroyed, flashes of light appeared one after another. Explosion. Dozens of metal bombs exploded continuously. The viscous metal fuel splattered through the air, then rained down from the sky like a rain of fire. The explosion that had happened so close to the hundred-eyed demon was only slightly distracted, but by the time he came back to his senses, he discovered that two figures were standing in front of him, one behind him. Both of them were smiling at him. An instant later, the solemn hum of a chord and the sound of a torrential downpour echoed through the air. This was the result of Huaishi and Motoko's fury axe simultaneously unleashing all of their power. After combining it with the use of origin substances, the purest form of destruction descended upon the hundred-eyed demon's body. Dual Xiang dragons. In the blink of an eye, when the metallic light dissipated, the hundred-eyed demon's body, which was riddled with holes, exploded. What flew out of the explosion was not blood, but countless mosquitoes and poisonous insects. They broke through the torrential downpour and reformed to a fourth-tier cultivator. The destruction of their physical body could be repaired by expending a bit of origin substance, compared to the damage to their physical body. The damage to their soul was even more unbearable. A vengeful counterattack. This time, however, after the thousands of eyes shot out an evil light, the old hundred-eyed demon's body trembled violently. He actually rose from the ground and charged into the sky, fleeing into the distance without even looking back. It was too strange. He had already been intimidated by Weishur's endless collection of relics from the border, the hordes of hell, and that terrifying sword. He even felt the faint threat of death. He immediately made a decision to give up on this mission. He had no sense of shame at all. He actually chose to flee in front of an opponent who was far weaker than him. Unfortunately, it was too late. At the same time, Beelzebub's excited cheers could be heard from the mist of dreams. "I'll do it!" After staying in the safe for almost a month, he was so touched that his eyes were brimming with tears. He could not wait to jump into Weishur's hands and urged, "Quick, shoot him! Shoot him! Shoot him!" Unfortunately, as soon as Weishur raised his gun, he felt the temperature in the air drop rapidly. He lowered his gun as Beelzebub screamed in pain. It seemed like he did not need to do anything. Everything else was fine. But once Lord of the Flies opened fire, the mist of dreams would not be able to cover him. "Damn you, human head dog! You'll die a horrible death." Lord of the Flies roared in anger. In the sky, countless frosty lights appeared. Miracle imprint, frost disaster. A few kilometers away, Lawrence, who had rushed over after receiving the call from the Heavenly Eye Ghost, had already rolled up his sleeves. He raised his right hand that was covered with secret arrays and reached forward. A terrifying chill spread out and completely froze the entire building. In the sky far away, the hundred-eyed ghost's movements suddenly stopped. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed it tightly. It turned around in fear and wanted to scream, but it could not make a sound. Its body kept changing under the attack of the chill. However, no matter if it turned into strands of hair or turned into countless poisonous insects through the divinity of a foreign country, it could not escape from that miracle. It even died faster. In an instant, it turned into an ice sculpture and fell to the ground with a silent cry. After smashing the hut, it fell into the dust. The ice spread, and the chill swept over. His body quickly cracked under the frost, and the ice kept falling off. However, no matter how his flesh regenerated, the icicles that kept piercing through his body would destroy it again. The spreading frost was actually extracting his source form. The vigorous life force that Weishur had been so troublesome to deal with had now become the raw material of the frost, killing him continuously. The strong died on their own. The hundred-eyed ghost wanted to open his evil eye again, but every time the negative source form gathered, it would be pierced by the icicles. He could not even put up a decent resistance. When he struggled and crawled out of the rubble, he saw the young man standing in front of him through his broken eye. He was looking down at him coldly. He opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but as he coughed violently, frozen blood spurted out from his lungs. "Who told you I was here?" Weishur asked softly. "Tell me, and I'll give you a quick death." Chapter 773. A tear for Venerable One had lowered himself to become an assassin, specifically targeting him, and even grasping his whereabouts. Even within the Alliance, there weren't many people like this. It's Huang Chuan's people spent money. The 100-eyed demon coughed up sharp, blood-colored icicles as he spoke in a muffled voice. That's a good joke. Continue. Huai Shi's expression became colder and colder. He remained unmoved. Huang Chuan was a typical extreme Dao cultivator. He was narrow-minded, held grudges, was reckless, did things without any scruples, and would definitely seek revenge for the smallest grievance. If it was someone unfamiliar with him, they would definitely think that the brute had taken advantage of the chaos to make a move against him. Unfortunately, that was all just an act. Among the 5 elders, Huang Chuan loved to act like an unreasonable brute the most. He would pester endlessly and only take advantage of others, but in reality, he was much more calculative than anyone else. He wasn't that stupid to make a move against one of his own at a time like this, and kill a green sun rising star with a deep background from the heavenly dog mountain. When he saw that his lie had been seen through, the 100-eyed demon fell silent for a moment. He laughed mockingly and retracted his gaze from Huai Shi. Even if he wanted to say something, the tomb of the unreturnable wouldn't allow it. They were both going to die, but dying in the tomb of the unreturnable would be more painful. It would be better to die here. The origin substance stored in the infernal realm would have a chance to be reborn from the coffin. The 100-eyed demon closed his eyes. If you want to kill me, then kill me. Stop wasting my breath. You're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. How strange. Huai Shi glanced at him one last time before retracting his gaze. If you don't want to die quickly, then you don't want to die easily. The sound of shadows boiling could be heard. The door to the bone-burying sanctuary once again rose from the darkness. Behind the open door, countless strands of darkness that seemed to have solidified extended outwards, landing on the 100-eyed demon's body like the hands of a child. In that instant, the old man froze in place. He turned around in disbelief. Within the darkness, there was a profound and cold divinity. It was as if it was a crack leading to the deepest part of the infernal realm. Under the watchful eyes of countless crows, the divinity that he had stolen from a foreign country actually began to tremble. Those eyes were not filled with killing intent, but an indescribable thirst. What the hell was that? His expression twisted as he struggled with all his might to resist, but it was already too late. Frost that penetrated deep into his bones kept piercing out, and his limbs were already entangled by the darkness. Bit by bit, they were pulled into the deepest depths of the darkness, never to return. Wait a minute. He tried his best to open his mouth and scream, but soon after, the darkness surged out like a fountain and swallowed him whole. It pulled his soul into an eternal dream of decay. It gradually melted, gradually disintegrated, and gradually became a part of the bone burial sanctuary. The door slammed shut and dissipated into the darkness. Finally, Lawrence descended from the sky onto the ice beam of the airframe. After landing on the ground, he was stunned for a moment and did not react. Where is he? Here. Huai Shi lifted his foot and kicked the corpse that was completely frozen into ice. Dead. Lawrence's eyes widened in disbelief. You did it. How could you destroy the corpse so quickly? Also, how the F*CK did you kill him? After a level 4 ascendant fused with divinity, they were no longer mortals. No matter how terrible the physical injuries were, they could be healed with origin substance. After the second transformation, their souls would fuse with the divinity, and they would begin to possess the characteristics of a former god. They could be seen as a demigod that once walked the human world. It was difficult to injure them with weapons. Even if they were weak and completely countered by Huaishur, there was nothing they could do at most. Huaishur's ferocious actions just now were not fatal at all. If he really wanted to kill this old man, he would have to rely on Beelzebub's judgment mode. What really hurt the hundred-eyed demon was Lawrence's miracle imprint that he had used with all his strength. He had recreated the disaster that the gods had once sent to Egypt in this very moment. As the most famous disaster recorded in the Holy Bible, the essence of the frost hailstorm disaster was the extermination of all life, cruelly destroying all life through freezing. Lawrence's role was to provide the tools to aim, as a bridge guiding the authoritative relics in Canaan to aim here and then deliver the punishment. It wasn't surprising that such destructive power could be so exaggerated. But how had Huaishur done it? He could see that there was only an empty shell left in front of him. Not to mention the stigmata, even the soul and divinity had disappeared, as if they had been eaten clean. It was a thorough death. Tengu Mountain has this kind of ability. He couldn't believe it. If you want to make a living, you have to have some trump cards, right? Huaishur calmly waved his hand. It's just a finishing blow. It's not worth mentioning. Lawrence's face twitched. What was he doing here? He felt that, even without him, this bastard could still kill the hundred-eyed demon here. This was 2F * King. Ridiculous. How did you know I was attacked? Huaishur asked. A call from Sheng Tianmu, an assassin in the collection of all sins. Someone put a bounty on you. Lawrence glanced at him. You'd better be careful. Your head is worth a lot of money now, second only to Sheng Tianmu. That's too much of a compliment. What if the other bosses see it? Huaishur shrugged, not caring at all. In fact, he felt that he could be worth more. He looked up and was about to speak to Lawrence, but his movements stiffened. The crows, who were searching the inner circle of Danbo City, finally sent him some unexpected news. What's wrong? Lawrence looked at Huaishur's stiff expression. Huaishur didn't say anything. He turned around. Amidst the storm and thunder, flames constantly lit up in the distance, and loud explosions could be heard. It was clearly raining, but the ground seemed to have been set on fire. The turbulence came suddenly, and along with the storm, everything was covered. When the broken car broke through the barrier of the storm and stopped at the scene of the accident, all that could be seen was a scene of devastation. The burnt car basket emitted a pungent smell, and the blood gradually diluted under the washing of the storm. The original color could no longer be seen. The pitch-black birds folded their iron wings and landed on the power lines in the storm, quietly overlooking the scene of devastation. There was also the dying young man. It was too late. In the cold rain, his messy yellow hair stuck to his pale face, and he was on the verge of death. This was a cruel punishment for traitors. After violently breaking most of his limbs and inflicting the most terrible pain, the arteries were cut open, and he was left at the scene of the crime, where he slowly bled to death. In the storm, he tried his best to open his eyes, trying to see the blurry figure in front of him. Boss, is that you? It's me, Ox Island. Huaishur squatted down and replied softly, You haven't been back for a long time, so I came to find you. In a daze, Ox Island tried his best to raise his hand. It was as if he was afraid that the person in front of him was just an illusion that would disappear in the blink of an eye, which was why he tried so hard to grasp it tightly. So hard. Boss, I didn't betray you. I didn't tell them. The man choked and coughed. He tried so hard to say what he wanted to say, but he gradually couldn't say it. He could only gasp for breath and make small sounds. Yes, I know. Huaishur nodded. He held his hand tightly and said solemnly, I'm fine, Ox Island, because you protected me. In the silence, Ox Island froze for a moment. A smile appeared on his pale face. He smiled. It was as if he had won. There was no more sound. Only Huaishur held his hand, feeling the last of his warmth disappear in the storm. There was no cure. Even Iron Crow's origin substance couldn't restore his scattered consciousness. He was already dead. Perhaps he should have died a long time ago. With such severe injuries and the loss of so much of his life force should have disappeared along with the blood in the rain. The only reason he was still here was because he still had something to say to Su Chun. After speaking, he left. He wasn't willing to stay for even a moment longer. Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the thing that Ox Island was holding tightly in his hand. He could only vaguely make out a few words on the piece of paper that had been soaked in blood and rain. Huaishur had once said to Thousand Leaves and Dragon too, "Even if I can save one, it's worth it." But now, he couldn't even save the person in front of him. Until the very last moment, the person he was supposed to save had done everything he could to protect himself, even if he had to sacrifice his life. Only because Huaishur had praised his innate talent, praised his talents, spent some time on him, and taught him some Latin that he couldn't use. That was all. "I'm sorry, Ox Island," he said softly. He apologized softly. "I lied to you. Even if you don't need me, you will definitely become a better person. Even if you don't sacrifice your own life, you will still have a bright future." In the silence, Huaishur carefully unfolded the piece of paper and looked at the words written on it. Hinsiturat Astra. "Sleep, my friend." Before he left, Huaishur turned around one last time and offered up a prayer. "May you pass through this path and reach the stars." Huang Chuan's residence. It was clearly raining cats and dogs, but everything was enveloped in an endless sea of flames. It was impossible to tell if it was blood or fire. His lungs twitched, but he didn't know if it was the smell of blood or the smoke that was too pungent. A loud noise came from the distance. It wasn't just a cry, but also a roar from the flames. Huang Chuan roared angrily. He raised the gun in his hand and shot the people who had charged into the courtyard one by one. In the end, the gun in his hand vibrated and let out a hollow click. There were no more bullets. He froze for a moment, then began to laugh mockingly in the rain, laughing at himself. He had always prided himself on his intelligence, but he had never imagined that he would be betrayed overnight. "Surrender, Patriarch." The traders outside the door slowly walked in and pulled out the weapons in their hands. "We have been masters and followers for so many years. I hope we can part on good terms." Part on good terms. Huang Chuan froze for a moment. He couldn't help but sneer and spit on the ground. "Brat, didn't your former team leader tell you? There is only one way out, and that is death." He grinned and sneered disdainfully. "Come, take my head." After a short silence, the subordinate nodded regretfully and pulled out the short knife at his waist. "Then, please forgive my rudeness." 5 minutes later, the head of the Huang Chuan family was put into a box. He died ferociously without any fear or weakness. The attackers cruelly killed all the survivors in the house, then poured gasoline and burned everything to the ground before leaving. The fire burned through the night. Die. Under the heavy rain, Akasaki Makoto roared angrily and raised his arms. His whole body was like steel. He endured dozens of assault rifles in front of him and rushed through the long distance. He raised his hand and punched with all his strength. The head of a gunman exploded into a pile of mush, followed by the second, the third, the fourth. In less than half a minute, those who blocked the way were all smashed by the iron fist. Madame Yuriko, where are you?" He didn't have time to check the wound on his abdomen. He staggered forward and pushed open the last door with all his might. Then he saw countless splashes of blood. All the attackers had died without an intact body. And in the center of the meeting room, Yuriko Loha turned her head. She held a heavy katana in her hand and was panting slightly. Her cold face was dyed red with blood. She was cold and solemn. Only at this time could people remember that the reason why she was elected as the patriarch was not because of her beautiful appearance, but because she was brave and strong, not inferior to men. After her husband, the previous patriarch, died young, she became the ghost wife of the Luoha family. Is it Akasaki? She waved her hand indifferently. I'm fine, just some small things. Akasaki bowed and apologized. I came late, please forgive me. Don't waste time. Akasaki, let's go. There are still many things to do. Yuriko Luoha listened to the fierce gunshots outside. She turned around and ordered the strong women who kept coming out of the secret door behind her. Everyone, prepare to fight the enemy. Chapter 774. In the dead silent operating room. There was only the low sound of the hemostatic forceps and scalpel colliding. With the turbid breathing under the oxygen mask, the shadowless light flickered slightly. Even though it had been washed with disinfectant many times, there was still a faint, moldy smell in the air. The operation was carried out in such a bad condition. The surgeon calmly sutured the flesh under his hand, letting the dust on the ceiling rustle down. When the last needle was done, he put down the tools in his hand, took a few steps back, and sighed tiredly. Dr. Shin Chung, thank you for your hard work. The assistant, who had only studied nursing for 2 years, took off the gloves and protective clothing for him, deeply admiring his sacrifice and efforts over the past few days. It's not a very difficult operation, just a long process. I hope he can survive. Dr. Shin Chung glanced at the child on the operating table and said calmly, the patient's care will be handed over to you. As for the medicine, I'll contact someone to send a batch of antibiotics as soon as possible. After politely greeting the others, he turned to leave. The nurse worriedly persuaded him. Mr. Shin Chung, it's not safe on the streets recently. My house is nearby. After the ward round later, would you like to rest at my house for a night? No need. There's a bed in the office. I'll make do. Dr. Shin Chung smiled. Later, I have to meet an old friend. Then be careful on the way. I will. Shin Chung walked to his office and sorted out the patient's files. After carefully checking the current storage of medicine, he rested for a few minutes, picked up a pen and notebook, and hurriedly began the routine inspection and ward round. The so-called ward was nothing more than a floor that had been specially partitioned off for the patients. On the second floor of this dilapidated theater, which had been reluctantly converted into a hospital, the huge space was carelessly drawn and covered. Under the dim yellow light, the cracks on the walls had not been repaired in time. Even with the windows open, the fan blowing wind, and the cooling of the earth air conditioner, it was still stuffy and made people want to sweat. The smell of decay lingered in the air. Between the beds, separated by the tattered curtains, Shun Chung lowered his head to check the condition of the patients and carefully recorded the data. Some of the patients had already fallen into a deep sleep, while others were half awake. Under the torment of the illness, their eyes were glazed over. Only under the stimulation of the flashlight would his pupils subconsciously contract. The hot air was filled with hoarse moans and dreamy cries. Shun Chung examined the patients one by one and walked forward silently. After a long time, he suddenly stopped. In the silence, he suddenly lowered his head and looked between the two beds. Under the illumination of the flashlight, a thin thread slowly appeared. Shun Chung adjusted his glasses and sighed softly. A tripwire grenade. He said, "How despicable, you Dong-ri. This is a hospital ward. In order to kill me, you don't even care about the lives of other innocent people." Ward? Someone laughed. In the dark corner, Yu Dongri raised his face and asked softly, "Don't you know better than me whether this is a ward or a laboratory?" At that moment, the sound of electricity suddenly rang out in the air. It spread out from Yu Dongri's hand, instantly tearing apart all disguises. Under the spread and shroud of the electric field, everything in the room was like the surface of water rippling under the impact of the ripples. Something seemed to have changed, but it also seemed to have not. The scene in the ward, the groans of pain, and the murmurs of nightmares were the same as before. But everything had become completely different. Just behind the hanging, tattered curtains on the hospital bed, under the deformed skin of the patients, there was something wriggling faintly, and the limbs under the bedding were slightly undulating in an abnormal posture. It was like a wriggling snake nest. Under the thin human skin, everything had already changed. Under the erosion and interference of the power, this place was already in hell, accompanied by Yu Dongri's words. In the night outside the window, there was a loud roar through the heavy rain, and burning flames continued to appear. The whole world seemed to be enveloped in a rain of fire in an instant. Only the cries of pain were the same as before. "Is this what you want to do, Shun Cheng's future?" Yu Dongri asked. "Transform the patients in the name of saving, and take revenge on your compatriots under the pretext of curing them. Compared to the fatal tumors and lesions, surgery is just a temporary pain. You seem to have never understood this principle." Shun Cheng replied calmly, "On the operating table, if you are not decisive, you will only consign the patient to eternal damnation. If the heart can't beat, a cardiac stimulant will be injected. If the body rots, it will be removed. Everything is for the ultimate cure." "This is your surgery?" Yu Dongri was amused. "I don't even see where the anesthesiologist is. Could it be that the inner circle of Danbois? No, all the mixed breeds have not been anesthetized enough. They are befuddled, and there is no tomorrow. Day after day, they sink into the darkness of the lowest level. They struggle hard, but can't break free from the quagmire. They can only choose the path of self-destruction. Without enough pain, they can't open their eyes and make their hearts beat again. This is just a trivial price to pay. It's the same old shock therapy. Don't you guys find it tiring to carry a bag of rice up and down the stairs repeatedly?" Yu Dongri sneered and looked around. "It seems that you have really prepared a good place. Which kind person helped you set up such a big business in the inner circle of Danbois? It's a business secret." Shun Cheng's future asked softly, "Why are you still standing there? Yu Dongri, are you still waiting for something? If it was in the past, you would have already rushed over to cut off my head, right?" Yu Dongri smiled indifferently. "Just you? I can't lift my spirits. Where is the big shot behind you? Or do you feel that you have grown up and want to break away from your parents' embrace and soar impatiently? The more he is not here, the more he has his own work and his own mission." Shun Cheng's future shook his head slowly, and his eyes became playful. "Why are you so obsessed with it? Yu Dongri, aren't you here for me? I know you, Yu Dongri. If you wanted to kill me, you wouldn't talk so much nonsense. But why are you waiting for so long? Isn't the hope of saving the inner circle of Danbois right in front of you? You just need to kill me. Or do you have another purpose?" He paused for a moment and revealed a mocking smile. "Yu Dongri, are you really as dignified as you say you are? Did you come back here for the inner circle of Danbois or for yourself?" Question. In the silence, Yu Dongri flicked the cigarette ash from his fingertips and sighed softly. "You have too many questions. I don't even know which one to answer first. Then you don't have to answer. You are over there, and I am here. This is already the best result." Shun Cheng's future slowly spread out his hands amidst the wails and groans around him. He softly declared, "Come, kill me, or I will kill you." Following his words, mournful screams burst forth. On both sides of Yu Dongri, the deformed flesh behind the curtains exploded in an instant. Sharp limbs tore through the rotten skin. Meticulously bred mutants were born from the containers. They impatiently tore apart the rags in front of them and pounced on the flesh and blood close at hand. Without the assistance of the mirror realm, this place had long since become the rancher's fasting circle. Now, after a long period of nurturing, his children had descended upon this chaotic land. There was a moment. Yu Dongri exhaled smoke from the corner of his mouth and laughed softly. "I thought you were going to reason with me." Under the pitch-black raincoat, 2 cold rays of iron light streaked out and were held in both of his hands. He took a deep breath, and the cigarette at the corner of his mouth lit up with a wisp of blazing light. At that moment, the iron light crisscrossed in the air and easily cut through the twisted limbs and monsters. Fishy blood sprayed out. It was difficult to describe whether the one standing there at that moment was a person, an invisible ghost, or something even more terrifying and sinister. Yu Dongri stepped forward under the cover of the viscous black blood. His face couldn't be seen clearly. Only the flickering light of the cigarette appeared in the air. It was so fleeting. It seemed to be weightless. Continuous hissing sounds burst out with the explosion of flesh, and what responded to them were grenades and explosives that were casually thrown out. The violent roar suddenly burst out in this space that wasn't too narrow, setting off layers of air waves. In the scorching hot wind, the ghost moved forward. The iron light in his hand crisscrossed and burst out with a shrill howl. A huge deformed spider suddenly pounced from behind. Then, in midair, its huge limbs had been torn apart. The iron light was like a bird, spreading its wings and flying in this narrow space. It was like the cruelest and coldest dance in the world. Death also seemed to have become an art. As the figure slowly moved forward, it quickly spread. As the ceiling shattered, a giant snake extended out from the crack, followed by a burst of iron light that spanned a long distance, sealing the venom and the blade that had not been spat out into the snake's open throat. The hilt of the blade was hot and vibrating, spewing out a ray of scarlet light and bursting out. The standard throwing knife, the assassination equipment that the Dark Army was most skilled and proficient in, was a must-have for soldiers who couldn't see the light of day to carry out extermination missions. But no one had ever been able to use every inch of its blade so perfectly to cause such terrible damage. When the surging monsters became a tide, the figure that moved forward step by step was like a reef. It didn't dodge or retreat. It just moved forward step by step. Under the pitch-black raincoat, there seemed to be endless sharp weapons hidden. Whether it was a knife, an explosive, a pistol, or a dagger, everything was perfectly controlled by his 10 fingers. The future of Divine Citadel stared indifferently at the scene of slaughter, retreating step by step, always maintaining a safe distance. But in the midst of the monster's strangulation, a heavy kukri knife came whistling and cut a shrill wound on his face. Then, the black raincoat broke through the blood that filled the air. Like a dark cloud, it wandered between the walls and the ceiling at an incredible speed, and its trajectory was hard to follow. The future of Divine Citadel retreated again, pressing his palm on the bed. Behind the curtain, the deformed teenager who had just finished the operation suddenly twitched. His limbs turned, and he crawled on the ceiling. He opened his mouth full of sharp teeth and bit at Yu Dongri. The next moment, his head flew in the air. It was pitifully weak. The future of Divine Citadel was already close at hand. A high-pitched gunshot burst forth. Before he could even react, Divine Citadel was sent flying by the impact of the shotgun. He leaned against the wall, blood splattering everywhere. A layer of deathly gray quickly appeared on his face. This time, it was the curse. In Yu Dongri's hands, the shotgun that had completed its mission collapsed inch by inch. This was a numbered curse bullet that he had plundered from the reserves of the Astronomical Association's technical department before he escaped from prison. It was an artificial relic that could cause damage to the ruler, and a curse that would kill anyone who touched it in the present world. No matter how many clones there were, no matter how many illusions there were, Divine Citadel would inevitably usher in death. But unfortunately, this trick has already been used, Yu Dongri. In the silence, Divine Citadel sighed softly, as if it was a pity. Under the torn shirt was a body covered in stitches. In order to guard against the attack of the curse, he had already modified the body. He was using layer by layer, replacing the organs and limbs from the black market. Just like the ship of Theseus, there was no part of him that belonged to himself. More importantly, you've just killed another innocent person, Yu Dongri. Divine Citadel smiled mockingly in the future, allowing most of the body to turn into ashes. From the beginning, this body did not belong to him. It was just a dying hybrid that could be seen everywhere in the inner circle of Danbois. In order to resist the corrosion of the curse bullet to the greatest extent, Divine Citadel did not even erase the original consciousness. An artificial chimera. In the consciousness, he chose one of the 52 bloodlines and the source of the organs. The target of the curse bullet was mixed up. When the most serious price was paid by another consciousness, the remaining violent toxicity was no longer a problem. It was enough for him to calmly withdraw and cut off his relationship with another body. At the same time, a sharp cry sounded from outside the door. The middle-aged woman, holding a bowl of hot soup, stood at the door in a daze. The scene in front of her was unbelievable, and she could not accept the head that had rolled to her feet. Her child! With the appearance of a young boy remaining, the lips of the head opened and closed, calling softly from the pool of blood, "Mother!" The soup bowl fell to the ground. "Child! My child!" The woman lowered her head in a daze, murmuring something over and over again. Finally, she let out a shrill cry. The shriveled limbs rapidly expanded, accompanied by a shrill cry. The consciousness that had fallen into the abyss was once again formed with a large amount of precipitation. The hideous limbs tore through the skin, and an astonishingly huge body continuously drilled out. The real monster was completed in an instant. The terrifying giant mouth opened, and countless sharp teeth rubbed against each other like scales, bursting into sparks and swallowing Yu Dongri. Then it began to twitch violently, feeling the pain from within the shell. There was a blazing light erupting from the narrow darkness. The alchemy array carved into the bones was activated, and the blessed sigil lit up, summoning the purification of the Holy Spirit. The huge monster stiffened in place, solidifying inch by inch and quickly collapsing. It turned into fine dust. Yu Dongri had disappeared. Only a pitch-black raincoat fell from the dust, accompanied by a faint, dripping sound. The expression of the future of the divine city stiffened for a moment. He propped up his broken body, lifted a corner of the raincoat, and saw the timer below that was gradually falling to 0. Tisk! He made a sound of displeasure. Then the flames of the alchemy explosives engulfed everything, shrouding the entire hospital and turning all the sins into ashes. In the deepest part of the darkness, the future of the divine city opened his eyes again from the petri dish. Outside the petri dish, under the black cloak, the skinny Yasukami raised his empty face as if he was looking at his miserable appearance. In the petri dish, the rapidly growing embryo had reached the age of 13 years old. "I told you, Divine City, you won't succeed this time. You will only destroy the test subject in vain, and let him be vigilant. It doesn't matter. Anyway, There is no need for a test subject. Through the thick petri dish, the dull voice of the divine city came. Feeling the power contained in this new body, he grinned and smiled. The law of the immortal beast is about to be completed. Soon, he would bid farewell to death. Eternity was close at hand. In the distance, on the burning ground, sorrowful cries resounded. Chapter 775. The day before the temporary meeting of the 5 permanent leaders, it was just past midnight, the first hour of the peace order. The chaos in the Donbwa inner circle began in the heavy rain, as if they had already formed an alliance. The Iron King faction and the K Society chose to attack from the north and south at the same time, instantly breaking through the hybrid alliance's defense line. The war began. However, their defeat had come earlier than they had expected, and even faster. It was even harder for them to accept. Kashawabra Hospital. Under the heavy rain, the flames were gradually extinguished, and only thick smoke spread slowly. Sheng Tengmu held an umbrella and silently stared at the collapsed building, as well as the corpses of the attackers. The corpses of the Russian Federation and Ingzhou people were pulled up by the silent hybrids and thrown into the places where the flames were still burning, skipping the funeral parlor process. They were buried in peace. The chaos and attacks just now had ended, and now only the ruins and the roar of the rain remained. Another explosion. Sheng Tengmu scratched his bald head and couldn't help but sigh. I'm really fated with explosions. How many times has it been? No one replied. Behind him, his silent subordinates were all injured, and many of them had been moved under the canopy where the rain couldn't reach and covered with white cloth. To kill Sheng Tengmu, the Iron King faction and the Russian Federation had sent out all their elites. Sheng Tengmu had already expected and prepared for this, but he didn't expect this day to come so suddenly and so fiercely. Before the outcome was decided, the wolf and the tiger did not fight to the death. Instead, they joined hands and wanted to bite the fox that was only trying to survive. There was no need to ask why. Since it had already happened, then according to the rules of the extreme Tao, the only path left was to fight to the death. Is there any news about the others? Sheng Tengmu turned around and asked. There's no news from the Chiba family, and Ms. Luoho is fine, but the Arakawa family. Tian was silent for a moment, then said in a muffled voice, They're gone. What about Mr. Takamoto? Sheng Tengmu asked about the whereabouts of the other spear-wielding guardian. Tian was silent for a moment. He's probably dead. How pitiful. I clearly made so many preparations, but I was still caught off guard. The old man lowered his head and coughed violently. The bandages on his shoulders and arms were soaked by the rain, and blood was seeping out. The old chauffeur, who had been with him for many years, returned. He wiped the blood off his hands and said in a deep voice, Master, the rescue team has arrived. Now that the family is safe, for your safety, please temporarily move. For the sake of safety, it's safer to escape as far as possible. Domxia, Shinlua, Australia. Can't you run to a ship? Sheng Tengmu shook his head. Let's go to the headquarters. He said, we have to let those people know where to go to exchange my head for the bounty. Otherwise, wouldn't everyone have come for nothing? In the silence, no one refuted. No one refuted. The chauffeur bowed respectfully and opened the door for him. Just like that, they drove into the depths of the vast fire. Under the same night sky, within the turbulent inner circle of the pill waves, rumbling could be heard from afar. The electricity had been cut off long ago, but there were still dots of light. After getting used to the unstable voltage throughout the year, everyone had the habit of preparing diesel generators. However, the lights were dim. In the office of YG Commercial, Otaku was restlessly pacing back and forth in the team leader's office. Basically, he would raise his head every few minutes and ask, Where's the team leader? Is he not back yet? Yamashita said. I already said that I can't contact him. What about Shanya? Shanya should have heard from him, right? He's with the team leader. All right, you've asked so many times. Don't be so flustered, okay? It's not like you're going to fight. Yamashita replied, without raising his head. On the coffee table in front of the sofa, there was a heavy whetstone. Under the soaking of the water, a low grinding sound burst out, and the knife light was bright. He carefully and solemnly sharpened the tachi until the sharp part of the blade was blown short hair, illuminating that pair of fierce eyes. It was red and shiny. For a moment, Otaku couldn't tell whether the knife was scarier or his eyes were scarier. Don't be afraid. Anyway, whether the team leader is here or not, our job is the same. Yamashita sheathed the knife and tightened the gun belt under his suit. After thinking for a while, he took out the pistol and pushed it from the table to Otaku, telling him, just do what you need to do. Just do what you need to do. As long as you can finish what you need to do, it doesn't matter whether you live or die. If there's any news from the team leader, contact me at any time. After he fixed the walkie-talkie, he pushed the door open and left. Otaku was stunned for a long time before he realized that he had actually been forced to act tough by the bastard Yamashita. In a fit of anger, he picked up the walkie-talkie and wanted to smash it. But after pausing for a moment, he hesitated and put down the walkie-talkie. Forget it. Isn't it just waiting for news? Just wait. Just wait. Otaku let out a long sigh, and his hair turned white from worry. After so many years of not killing people with a knife, he realized that he had become so weak that even he couldn't stand it anymore. In the unbearable silence, he put his hands together and could only recite Buddhist scriptures repeatedly. He prayed devoutly to the blackbird dozing on the shelf, the legendary divine bird crow that conveyed God's orders. He hoped that the person was fine. Relying on the border cable that had been brought in earlier, the streets outside were barely illuminated. Boxes and sundries were piled up everywhere, acting as roadblocks. Thanks to the preparations made a few days ago, the YG group had already built a large number of illegal buildings in their territory. Now, it was much easier to defend. Before this, they had already repelled several attacks from outsiders. At the very least, they would have no problem holding out until dawn. However, at this critical moment, their team leader wasn't here. Everyone was suddenly at a loss. Yamashita could only try his best to look confident and dignified as a senior patrolling everywhere and trying to appease the people as much as possible. Unfortunately, after exhausting all his words, he had little effect. He felt that the team leader coming back and moving a chair to sit on the street would be more effective than him. From time to time, they could hear the crows cry and the sound of those huge birds rising and falling, which made the extreme Tao practitioners who came and went feel a lot more at ease. Over the past few days, the people of the YG group had gradually become accustomed to the wanton crow flying around their territory. Someone had asked about the origin of this group of crows. After all, they had never seen such a ridiculous crow in the present world. But basically, the extreme Tao practitioners had no culture. They just thought that it was a special species from some border and didn't think too much about it. Don't ask. If you ask, it means that the boss is awesome. Can't Bodhisattva, Hachibana, send down heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals to help us? Why do you want to ask so much? Those vigilant birds of prey hovered in the night sky. When they detected an abnormal intrusion, they would let out a sharp cry. Even when there were fewer people, they would swoop down and attack in groups. The reason why the YG group could still maintain basic internal stability in the turmoil outside was because of their warning and support. But now, a large group of crow was gathering and circling in the south. Yamashita was stunned for a moment. He received a walkie-talkie signal from the south intersection. When he arrived, the people outside the barricade were already impatient. "Hey, hurry up!" The person speaking outside was Kurikawa Gumi's Ruatu. He urged irritably, "Mr. Akasaki is seriously injured and urgently needs treatment. Hurry up and call the doctor out." The extreme Dao guarding the door hesitated, not knowing whether to open the door or not. When he saw Yamashita coming, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm Yamashita Kuro. What's the matter?" "Yamashita, it's me. It's me. Have you forgotten? Kurikawa Gumi's Nakazuchi. We even drank together." Seeing Yamashita coming out, Kurikawa Gumi's Ruatu became excited. "Hurry up and help. Mr. Akasaki is seriously injured." "Where's the doctor?" "Mr. Akasaki can't hold on any longer." "Akasaki, Jin Chuan Kai's leader, Akasaki?" Yamashita was stunned for a moment and subconsciously became nervous. He raised his hand and wanted to move the barricade away. But after a pause, he suddenly reacted, "Wait, where's Mr. Akasaki? Why don't I see him?" Nakazuchi turned around and pointed to the car behind him. Behind the open window, a weak figure raised his hand with difficulty and waved at them. Under the light, the face was as pale as paper. "It's Mr. Akasaki." Some sharp-eyed subordinates had seen his face clearly. Yamashita took a look with binoculars and was relieved. He began to regret his suspicion. He waved his hand and ordered his subordinates to start moving the barricade. Nakazuchi was overjoyed. He walked forward and greeted him. His left hand, which was hidden behind his back, clenched excitedly. Just behind the car, in the alleys on both sides, the attackers with knives and guns in their hands began to take deep breaths, waiting for the signal. Their eyes were already burning red. They couldn't wait. But just as the atmosphere in front of them calmed down, a crow flapped its wings and landed on the roof of the car. It looked down curiously at the group of people who seemed to be no different from the attackers. It didn't understand what was going on. It cawed twice. Nakazuchi waved his hand unhappily. He wanted to chase away this overly large crow, but he was afraid of its sharp claws and long beak. He didn't dare to get too close. The crow stretched its neck to look at him. Then it lowered its neck and poked its head out from the roof of the car. It stared at the pale man in the car, who was on the verge of death. In the shadows of the car, Akasaki Makoto was also looking at it. He slowly tightened his grip on the tachi in his hand. His eyes gradually became dangerous. "Caw!" The crow suddenly opened its mouth and screamed at the top of its voice. Everyone was shocked. Then, its long beak pierced through Akasaki Makoto's face. Then, before he could react, it flapped its wings and flew into the sky. It was still holding a silicone mask in its mouth. It was purely a habitual act of seizing and robbing. With a new toy in hand, it caught excitedly in the air. But in a moment of carelessness, the toy that it had just snatched fell to the ground. It landed in front of Yamashita. In an instant, there was a dead silence. Everyone froze in their actions. Yamashita lowered his head and looked at the soft mask at his feet. He raised his head and looked at Nakazuchi, who was chatting affectionately in front of him. Nakazuchi also raised his head and looked at him. His face gradually turned pale. He subconsciously swallowed his saliva. "Well, the weather has been dry recently. Akasaki's skin has been peeling quite badly. So this, I see." Yamashita nodded in realization. Then he pulled out his sword and slashed at the smiling face. He roared angrily, "Dog traitor, die!" Chapter 776. Changes were always unexpected. First, the imposter had exposed himself. Before anyone could react, the foot of the mountain was already unwilling to be long-winded. He struck first and gained the upper hand. With a backhand swing of his sword, he cut off the head of this bastard. Blood splashed 5 steps. It could only be said that this group of Jedao was too serious. They were all aiming for the neck of others. If they could cut off a head, they would definitely not be long-winded. Until the foot of the mountain kicked Zhong Jiqiao's head away like a rubber ball. He raised his sword and roared. The attacker, who was pretending to be a harmless ally, didn't even have time to react. Only the imposter, who had lost his silicone mask, kicked the car door open in anger. **CK these bastards. Yamashita instinctively touched his ribs, wanting to shoot the dog, but he touched nothing. Only then did he realize that he had already given the pistol to Otakashi. In anger, he did not even care about the gun. He directly swung the knife in his hand and threw it at the roaring face. The screams of the crows echoed in his ears, causing his mind to be in a trance for a moment. But when he reacted, it seemed that endless power emerged from his body. With the rapid trembling of the shadow under his feet, like a crow spreading its ferocious wings, the knife in his hand actually made a roar. The iron light whistled, circled, and rushed straight into his mouth, coming out from the back of his neck. Then, the vast flock of crows wandering in the sky had already overturned like a tide. The people hiding in the dark alleys on both sides had just come out when they saw countless birds rushing toward their faces. The members of the Huai Chi group had already crossed the fence and rushed out from behind the roadblock. With the cooperation of the crows, they fought with the attackers. Nakajima, that trash, failed. In the distance, the Russian Federation people holding binoculars spat out thick phlegm and disdainfully scolded. Andriusha, I'll leave it to you. It should have been like this. The burly man sitting on the cement block raised his hand, wiped his beard, and threw the empty bottle to the ground. The sound of steel rubbing against each other burst out from under his slightly cumbersome and bloated coat. His boots echoed as he stepped on the ground. At the end of the long street, the man named Andre put on an old-fashioned football helmet, bent down slightly, and assumed a sprinting posture. Immediately after, a loud bang was heard. It was as if a rhinoceros was galloping on the ground. The heavy echo spread into the distance. Amidst the rumbling, cracks once again appeared on the road that had been in disrepair for a long time. Andre, on the other hand, had already rushed into the crossroads like a truck loaded with goods. He didn't stop at all as he braved the bullets from behind the bunker and the attacks from the crows in the sky, charging straight ahead. His speed became faster and faster. It's crashing into us. Before the panicked warning could spread out, a loud bang followed. Under Andre's charge, the roadblocks, bunkers, and even the heavy cement blocks were all crushed into pieces. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds. Just behind him, the Russian Federation gang members who had lost their patience jumped down from the rampaging truck and swarmed in. They raised the assault rifles in their hands and began to shoot randomly in all directions. They didn't even care about the safety of the original Russian Federation army. At the very front, Andre opened his arms and let the guns around him shoot at him. He grinned and revealed a thick piece of iron under his broken coat. It was a genuine bulletproof iron suit. The terrifying defense achieved purely by relying on the weight of the suit, together with the strength-type sublimata, turned him into a human-shaped tank, rampaging through everything. Other than some of the vital parts of his face that needed to be blocked, he didn't need to care about anything else. Ever since he lost his job as an athlete because of the sublimator, Andre's favorite thing now was to let his opponents have a taste of the impact of a professional football player. When he bent down and began to charge, the ground would begin to tremble violently. After smashing through several walls, he laughed excitedly amidst the blood splattering everywhere. The coat on his body had already begun to burn, and the iron suit had already been burned into a fiery red color, rising with a raging iron light. Everywhere he went, flames would spread out. "Come on, coward, come on." In the midst of his drunkenness, Andre roared, "Fight with me." In the chaotic battle, Yamashita angrily glared at the bastards who defected to the enemy. "You traitors, you actually defected to the Russian Federation? Yeah, what else could it be?" Kirikawa Gumi's Ruojong, Nishikawa spat in disdain. "Like your leader who died without a complete corpse?" Yamashita was stunned for a moment and didn't react. "Don't tell me you still don't know?" Nishikawa mockingly laughed strangely. Why Kijin offended the leader of the K faction? The K faction came to Dambwa Inner Circle, and the first person they wanted to kill was him. Even the Iron King faction wanted him dead. Not only did they specially invite experts from outside, but the sublimators from both sides also participated in the hunt. I'm afraid not even his ashes are left now. Shut up. In an instant, an uncontrollable anger rose from Yamashita's chest, almost like a flame that was about to ignite him. Then he saw real flames emerging from his hands. However, he couldn't care less about that. Amidst this sudden fury, Yamashita roared. The tachi in his hand began to glow with a burning color. The anger that had condensed into a solid form filled the blade, giving it the power of a heavy axe. Blood splattered everywhere as he attacked with hatred. When Yamashita came back to his senses, he discovered that he had actually split his opponent in half along with his weapon. He lowered his head and stared in disbelief at the fiery red blade in his hand. He turned around and looked at the crow, who had landed on his shoulder at some unknown time. The crow cried out excitedly and flapped its wings, urging him not to waste any more time and to once again throw himself into the slaughter. An unending stream of anger flowed out from those scarlet eyes, along with the origin substance. The bird that had delivered the gods' imperial decree had returned to the mortal world, once again sending down a miracle and power. Holy! Yamashita held the burning anger in his hand and unconsciously let out a roar amidst the indescribable fervor. Similar roars rose and fell in succession. In this turbulent darkness, countless origin substances rose from the bodies of the members of the Huai Kaigi group. Under the cover of the flock of crows, a powerful force suddenly entered their bodies, continuously extracting their anger, pain, and resentment, giving them a ferocious appearance. Then it created death. What is that? In the distance, Alexis raised his binoculars and was stunned. It was hard to imagine that the Huai Kaigi group had so many ascendants hidden in the dark. It was impossible to count. 70? 80? Or even more. How could there be so many? Wasn't the Pocket Paper Group just a bunch of trash that had been formed less than a month ago by relying on the pocket paper people to put it together? How could there be so many ascendants? And there was also the increasing number of crows. In that moment, his heart suddenly contracted. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead as he froze in place. He could feel the sound coming from afar. It was as if there was a giant heart slowly beating in the depths of the darkness, emitting a faint rumble of thunder. A huge amount of origin substance gushed out from the heart, spreading in all directions like fresh blood. It contained pain, despair, and ferociousness in the office of the Huai Kaigi group. Otama looked up in shock at the birdcage that suddenly opened on the table. Endless darkness gushed out from it, spreading and sweeping. The young master of life's divinity was operating, and a miracle was happening, or rather, a disaster. The decaying dream slowly rose from the darkness, opening a gap along with the bone burial ground. The giant birds chirped excitedly, shaking off their mortal feathers. Iron light transformed from their wings, revealing a ferocious mechanical appearance. The lair that led to hell was opened. In that moment, a large flock descended. The moment the only restraint was released, the circling crow tide shone with a mournful sparks burst out amidst the countless sounds of metal rubbing against each other. The mechanical crows spread their wings. Angry flames, hateful blood, and painful darkness alternated. It was time to hunt. The surging darkness swallowed all the lights, replacing them with the bloody eyes of the members of the Kaigi group and an increasingly ferocious aura. The power of the spirits descended here. Even if it was given to only a few people, in an instant, the advantage that the Russian Federation had created through a large number of firearms was destroyed by the monster-like power. In the midst of running, Andrei suddenly turned around, only to find that he had sunk into the deepest darkness. He couldn't help but roar. "Coward, come out and face me!" No longer caring about his surroundings, the bear-like sublimator unleashed his strongest firepower, charging towards the dancing shadows in the darkness. But no matter how far he rushed, how many walls he broke, how many shadows he tore apart, he couldn't touch any enemy. It was as if he had been thrown into the most desperate confinement room, isolated forever. Only the crows in the sky looked down mockingly, coldly staring at the flames on the canned food extinguishing bit by bit, waiting for the best time to enjoy the taste. Let it cool, eat it slowly. At the outermost periphery, at the edge of the sinister darkness, Alexis' face was pale, and he couldn't help but take a step back, and then another. Cold sweat seeped from his forehead, and he panted heavily. When the eyes in the darkness looked in his direction, he felt as if he had been thrown into the deep sea, and he felt an indescribable sense of suffocation. The stigmata wailed. Even his soul felt like it was being devoured by the darkness. The indescribable horror eroded his mind, and his heart twitched. It's the hordes of hell. Those nouns that only appeared in the mouths of explorers, synonymous with terror and despair, suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. They had broken into the hordes of hell's lair. The binoculars fell from Alexis' hands, and he leaned against the wall, unable to control his desire to escape. In the silence, only the flickering flames next to him flickered. His handsome face was illuminated by the flames, and he looked like a ferocious demon. He looked down quietly. It was as if he had just gone through a long journey, but he didn't look tired at all. His clothes were riddled with bullet holes, and they had long been dyed a dull, grayish red by the rain and blood. "Do you need help calling an ambulance?" The man smiled and asked with concern. "You don't look too well." Alexis turned his head around, and before he could react, he let out a scream and quickly backed away. He pulled out a gun from his pocket, pointed it at the man's face, and was about to pull the trigger. But when the man looked at him with eyes as deep as the abyss, his finger froze on the trigger. He lost all his strength. You. He tried to speak, but no sound came out of his throat. Behind the man, the darkness seemed to be dancing. Pairs of scarlet eyes slowly appeared, and they looked like the hungry grins of demons. They stared at Alexis' face and took away his last bit of courage. The man's will was completely torn apart. "God, forgive me," Alexei murmured in a daze. He suddenly turned the muzzle to his chin and pulled the trigger with all his strength. Bang! In the sudden darkness, the ferocious eyes finally disappeared. Alexis closed his eyes peacefully. It was finally over. It didn't take long for the long-planned attack on Huaishur Group to come to an end. The streets were almost dyed red with blood, and in the mess, there were corpses everywhere. Only the crows were jumping up and down excitedly, absorbing the aura of death floating in the air and letting it flow into the sacred burial ground. In the seemingly eternal darkness, death was gradually gathering. There were even more deaths occurring in this land. Huaishur raised her head and looked at the area around her. The entire inner circle of the pill wave was filled with burning flames. Everything had been violently swept into this turmoil. How is this possible? The man at the foot of the mountain came back to his senses and noticed the chaos in other places. He couldn't believe it. This is the heart of the Alliance. How could it be attacked here? It's simple, Weno. Huaisha looked up and stared at the rising flames in the distance. There are two possibilities. Either the Alliance is completely vulnerable and is on the verge of destruction. He paused for a moment and said coldly, or someone betrayed us. This was not an external invasion, but internal strife. Someone took advantage of this opportunity to raise the flag of rebellion. This was what Huaisha felt was the most ridiculous. The traitor who rebelled was not him. At the same time, in the Alliance headquarters that was heavily surrounded, Sensei stared at the rebels at the bottom of the stairs. In the end, his disappointed gaze fell on an incomparably familiar face. "Why do you have to do this, Chiba-kun?" He asked softly. "Is it because I didn't give you enough?" Surrounded by the rebels, Chiba-kun shook his head with a smile and didn't answer. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.